Chapter 558. Faced with Gu Qixiao's question, Long Fei remained silent, a complicated look in his eyes. Gu Qixiao silently flew away from the roof, his blood-red figure drifting into the darkness. It was a desolate and sorrowful feeling that stemmed from a kind of loneliness that would last for eternity. This night was destined to be a sleepless one. Gu curled up in the branches of an ancient tree in the backyard, dreaming of his childhood. Behind the medical academy, there were tall mountains and lush greenery. That night, a clear cry broke the decades of silence in the poison sect's forbidden grounds. In a small thatched hut in the valley closest to the medical academy, a baby boy was born. There was no midwife inside, so the boy's father had personally delivered him. The mother was already unconscious and was quickly sent out without so much as a glance at the child. The newborn couldn't find his mother, so he cried incessantly in search of comfort. He cradled the infant in his arms and gently rocked him, smoothing him out as he coaxed, "Baby, be good, don't cry, baby, be good." He was born into a prestigious family in Medical City and was the most talented disciple in the Medical Academy's history. He was the Academy head's appointed successor and the youngest vice head of Medical City, so people called him Vice Head Gu. At the age of 30 he was still unmarried. Only he knew how this son came about and only he knew why he wanted this son. The baby's cries grew louder and louder, sounding especially desolate in the deathly stillness of the forest. A man in blue soon arrived and took the child from his hands. After examining him for a while, he exclaimed, "He's actually safe and sound." When the child was still in his mother's womb, they'd worked together to perform all kinds of experiments on him. They'd used special acupuncture techniques to cause him to fall ill, then observed his condition before treating him and tracking his prognosis. During the 10 months of pregnancy, they'd experimented once a month and successfully solved an extremely troublesome illness during pregnancy. They'd also developed the most effective treatment and medicine. Although there was only one cure, it was enough to shake the medical world. Because of this, one of them had jumped 2 levels to become a medical sage, while the other had jumped 1 level to become a medical ancestor. Of course, after the child's mother was disposed of, no one but the 2 of them knew of their cruelty. It's already been cured, so of course it's safe and sound. He was very confident. Vice Academy head Gu, is the child hungry? Should I feed her or? The man hadn't even finished speaking when Vice Academy head Gu decisively replied, "Give him some medicine." "Still too young, I'm afraid." The man's words were interrupted once more. Department head Gu said, "She was fed medicine every day in her mother's womb, but didn't she survive? What's there to be afraid of?" His obsession with medical skills could be described as fanatical. He was most obsessed with the study of human diseases. He had wanted to do research for a long time. Starting from the study of embryos, he wanted to figure out the characteristics of the human body at every stage, the process of disease, disease resistance factors, treatment essentials, and so on. The man was absolutely obedient to Vice Academy head Gu and immediately brought over the medicinal decoction he'd prepared earlier. One of them carried the other and fed the child with a small spoon. The 2 of them treated the child like a patient. They were meticulous, careful, and serious. This was the child's first bite of food. It was bitter. Without the contrast of sweetness, the child did not know that this taste was called bitter. He did not know that this was one of the worst tastes in the world. He ate with relish. His little mouth instinctively sucked and swallowed the medicinal soup that was fed into his mouth. After a while he was satisfied and stopped crying. His mouth, stained with medicine, would occasionally curve into a sweet smile, making others unconsciously smile along with him. His smile had been very beautiful since he was young. Vice Academy head Gu, "Why don't you give the child a name?" The man said with a smile. "Today is the 7th of the 7th month. Let's call him Xiaoqi." Vice Academy head Gu only gave Xiaoqi a nickname. The child didn't need a proper name because he would only exist as a secret. Just like that, Xiaoqi ate medicine for 3 days without any problems. However, something happened on the 4th day. He cried and cried, vomiting up all the medicine and water he'd been fed. He was like a child who couldn't find his mother and refused all consolation. Vice Academy head Gu and the man tormented each other for an entire day. Even their hearts of stone had been broken by Xiaoqi's crying. Of course, they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to protect this special child, the child they'd spent so much effort to obtain. Helpless, they could only stop feeding him medicine and call for a wet nurse. The wet nurse immediately comforted Xiaoqi. Soon the man discovered that Xiaoqi's pulse was abnormal. Vice Academy head Gu, "We must stop all experiments and raise the child first. Otherwise all our previous efforts will be wasted." Vice Academy head Gu gently stroked Xiaoqi's cheek. He looked completely like a loving father, his eyes full of tenderness and love. Xiaoqi was his treasure, his most infatuated treasure. Of course he would love him wholeheartedly. He said, "Let's try again." And so, for the next 3 days they alternated feeding and feeding medicine. Xiaoqi's pulse became worse and worse. Finally, Vice Academy head Gu was afraid and immediately stopped the experiments and began the normal treatment. He didn't dare to sleep at all. He held Xiaoqi and watched Xiaoqi sleep, watched Xiaoqi wake up, watched Xiaoqi smile, watched Xiaoqi cry. 10 days later, Xiaoqi's pulse finally returned to normal. However, he had developed a bad habit of having trouble sleeping. He had to be coaxed half the day before he could fall asleep. Vice Academy head Gu personally held him every day. "Cheer be good. Cheer be good. Cheer be good and sleep. Cheer be good and sleep." His voice was so gentle and kind that Xiaoqi gradually fell asleep. He would grin from time to time in his dreams, still as sweet as ever. A baby's memory was very short. He didn't know how to hate, so he easily forgot the pain from a few days ago. Vice Academy head Gu and the man discussed and analyzed the situation. They decided to raise Xiaoqi until he was 6 years old first before beginning their sacred experiments. Just like that, Xiaoqi survived in the forest of the poison sect's forbidden grounds. When he was 4 months old, his wet nurse disappeared. For as long as he could remember, the only people who had accompanied him besides his father was the man surnamed Ling. Xiaoqi called him Uncle Ling. As he grew up, he began to have clear preferences and dislikes. He began to boldly explore the mysterious world of the poison sect's forbidden grounds, filled with curiosity and pleasant surprise. When he found a tree he liked, he would wait for his father to come back at night and say, "Father, Cheer wants to be a tree and have flowers bloom all over my body." When he found a bird flying high in the sky, he would wait for his father to come back at night and say, "Father, Cheer wants to be a bird and fly to the other side of the mountain." He found that all the plants in the mountains had withered and died. When his father came back, he would say sadly, "Father, will Cheer wither and die one day?" "Withered and dead. Once winter passes and spring comes, you'll come back to life," his father replied. Xiaoqi was so happy that he grew impatient. "Father, Xiaoqi doesn't like to wither. I don't like to die." His father's eyes were always filled with love when he looked at him. His father would patiently answer his every question. His father was Xiaoqi's everything in his life. Xiaoqi had many questions, but he never asked his father where his mother was. Because in Xiaoqi's isolated world, no one had ever told him about the existence of a mother. Xiaoqi's world consisted of his father, Uncle Ling, and all the flowers, plants, birds and beasts in the mountains. Xiaoqi was very smart and learned everything he saw once he was taught. He had a photographic memory and remembered every single poisonous plant his father mentioned. Before he was 6 years old, he had already recognized every single one of the poisonous plants in the mountains. Life in the mountains was the most unrestrained. Little Seven was like a wild child. Every day, with a dirty little face, she ran all over the mountains and plains. She behaved atrociously without a care in the world. However, no matter how carefree he was, Xiaoqi still needed someone to accompany him every night. He needed his father to coax him to sleep. "Cheer be good. Cheer be good. Cheer be good." These words had accompanied Xiaoqi for 6 whole years. That day his father came back at noon. Xiaoqi was still running around the mountains when his father played the melodious flute. Xiaoqi was overjoyed and ran back excitedly. "Father." "Hey?" His father picked him up and lifted him up high. His father tickled his armpits until he giggled. His father was affectionate with him for a while before putting him down. Xiaoqi saw a table full of dishes the moment he entered the house. They were all his favorite dishes. He didn't understand and turned to look at his father. His father was smiling when his expression suddenly became serious. "Xiaoqi, after this meal, you can only take medicine every day from tonight onwards." The 6-year-old Xiaoqi didn't understand. His attention was on the delicious food on the table. He asked in surprise, "These are all for Xiaoqi to eat?" "Xiaoqi, I'll bring you to the medical school tomorrow. Don't call me father anymore, okay?" Xiaoqi didn't say anything. He ate with relish. His father said seriously, "Xiaoqi, you have an evil disease. I can't cure you. Only Uncle Ling can. From now on you'll follow Uncle Ling and call him father. You have to listen to Uncle Ling and take your medicine every day, okay?" Xiaoqi still didn't answer. He licked his lips and narrowed his eyes to look for the food he wanted to eat. "Xiaoqi, you're not allowed to tell anyone about this. No matter what they ask, you have to shake your head, okay?" His father reminded him seriously again. Xiaoqi continued to talk to himself. When his stomach was round, he turned to look at him. He blinked his innocent eyes and said, "Father, Xiaoqi doesn't want to go." "Father wants Xiaoqi to go?" his father said seriously. Xiaoqi hesitated. After a while he asked, "Why?" "You'll understand when you grow up," his father replied. "I really don't want to go." Xiaoqi was in a difficult position. "If you don't go, you'll never see father again." His father suddenly became serious. Xiaoqi was stunned. He muttered, "Xiaoqi isn't sick. Xiaoqi still wants to see father?" Xiaoqi thought for a long time. He understood but didn't quite understand. In the end he lowered his head. "Xiaoqi is sick." This year, Department Head Gu became the head of the medical school and wielded great power. He had 1,000 affairs to attend to every day and couldn't come to the poison sect's forbidden grounds every day. This year, Elder Ling became the head elder of the Council of Elders and had more free time to focus on studying medicine. In the end, the poison sect's forbidden grounds weren't a place to stay for long. After some discussion, the two men decided to bring Xiaoqi to the medical school and make him a disciple of the medical school under the guise of an adopted son and a herbalist. On the 7th day of the 7th month, Head Elder Ling brought Xiaoqi back to the medical school. Chapter 559. The 6-year-old Xiaoqi was brought back to the medical academy by Elder Ling. It was the first time he saw so many people, the first time he realized how noisy the world could be. It was also the first time he didn't smile for an entire day. He lived with Elder Ling. On the first night he only drank a bowl of medicine and was starving before he even slept. He sneakily knocked on Elder Ling's door. "Elder Ling, Xiaoqi is hungry, you have to call me daddy." Elder Ling didn't open the door and corrected him loudly. Xiaoqi didn't want to call him that, but he didn't contradict him either. He directly omitted the form of address. "I'm hungry, so hungry." Elder Ling seemed dissatisfied with the lack of greeting and didn't reply for a long time. Xiaoqi knocked on the door with all his might. "I'm hungry." "Xiaoqi, be good. Go to sleep and you won't be hungry." Elder Ling didn't get angry. He was just being perfunctory. "I'm so hungry I can't sleep." Xiaoqi said pitifully. "Then go drink some water." "Your father said that you can't eat anything," Elder Ling replied. Xiaoqi didn't say anything. He looked at the bright lights of the medical academy and suddenly missed his dark little thatched cottage. Just as he was about to leave, Elder Ling said faintly from the other side of the door, "If you dare to eat secretly, you'll never see your daddy again." "I won't," Xiaoqi said fiercely as he huffed. Unfortunately, there was no response from the other side of the door. Xiaoqi stood there stubbornly for a long time. When he saw that there wasn't any movement, he hurriedly knocked on the door. "When is my daddy coming?" "Your daddy is in seclusion. He'll only be here in a month," Elder Ling replied honestly. Xiaoqi didn't like Elder Ling, but he didn't leave. He sat outside the door for an entire night. Without his daddy's coaxing he couldn't fall asleep. In the end he didn't even know how he fell asleep. He had a dream. In the dream, his daddy's gentle voice echoed in his ears. "Chiner, be good. Chiner, be good." The next day he had medicine for all 3 meals. There was only 1 bowl of medicine for each meal. If he didn't drink it he wouldn't see his daddy. If he ate secretly he wouldn't see his daddy. No matter how smart and mature a 6-year-old child was, he couldn't be scared, but he couldn't be starved either. Xiaoqi, on the other hand, gritted his teeth and foolishly held on for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally, on the 4th day he couldn't hold on any longer and fainted in front of Elder Ling's room. Elder Ling had actually been paying close attention to his movements the entire time. Knowing that he had fainted, he immediately came out to check his pulse. The result was to his delight. His pulse was exactly as he and Academy Head Gu had predicted. If he could endure it for another 3 days and 3 nights, the child would really have to take medicine for the next few years. Elder Ling fed Xiaoqi both medicine and sugar water on time. One day later Xiaoqi woke up in a daze. He almost recognized Elder Ling as his father. The word father was on the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed it. He muttered, "Chiner will be good. Chiyer will be good." He quickly fell into a coma again. The moment he lost consciousness, Dean Gu walked out from the side and personally took his pulse. "Very well," Dean Gu said in a low voice. Elder Ling was overjoyed. "Don't worry, Dean. He won't be able to escape from me. He won't run away." Dean Gu was very certain. He had been with this child for 6 years and knew how much this child relied on him. A single sentence of "I'll never see father again" was enough to threaten him. 2 days later Xiaoqi suddenly woke up. He felt that something was wrong with his stomach, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He sat on the bed in a daze and rubbed his stomach, muttering, "I'm so hungry, Just then Elder Ling brought in a table full of food. The fragrance of the food quickly filled the room. Xiaoqi was already hungry, and the smell of the food made him even more hungry. He looked at it from afar and couldn't stop swallowing his saliva. However, he didn't ask nor did he beg. He knew that he couldn't eat. "Xiaoqi, it's time to eat. Come over." Elder Ling finally spoke. The famished Xiaoqi didn't rush over. Instead, he asked cautiously, "If I eat, can I still see father?" "Yes." Elder Ling chuckled. Xiaoqi was overjoyed. He didn't dare ask any more questions, afraid that Elder Ling would go back on his word. He rushed over and wolfed down the food. Even an adult stomach wouldn't be able to take it if they suddenly overeat after starving for so long, much less a 6-year-old child. Xiaoqi hadn't eaten much yet, but his stomach was already hurting. However, he endured it and wolfed down the food. He didn't know when his next meal would come. He thought that if he ate more and hid it in his stomach, he wouldn't be hungry so quickly. However, his stomach gradually became more and more uncomfortable. It felt like it was bloating and cramping. His chest felt stifled. He wanted to vomit, but he couldn't. Even breathing was difficult. Finally, he put down his chopsticks and looked at Elder Ling for help. He felt terrible. Coldly, Elder Ling looked at him and waited, unmoved. Xiaoqi retched a few times but didn't manage to vomit. Suddenly he was afraid. He pounded his chest and stomach, crying out in pain, "Father! I want father! I want father!" Sob sob. Breathing was already difficult, and this crying made it even more difficult. His little face turned red and he kept vomiting in fear. It seemed that vomiting would make him feel better. However, he just couldn't vomit. At first he was standing. Then he lay on his stomach. Finally, he rolled on the ground and cried his heart out. His delicate features were all distorted. Finally, he rolled to Elder Ling's feet and begged, "Uncle Ling, save Xiaoqi. Uncle Ling, Xiaoqi is in pain." Sob sob. Elder Ling stepped back and Xiaoqi lay on his stomach again. Elder Ling stepped back again and Xiaoqi struggled to roll over. He hugged Elder Ling's shoe as if he was hugging his last straw. Sob sob. Sob sob. However, Elder Ling kicked him away. Xiaoqi rolled to the side and lost his last bit of strength. He lay on the ground, dying. His breathing was weak. He couldn't even cry. He whimpered and instinctively said, "Mom, Mom, what's that?" He didn't understand. He was just like when he was born. He didn't know anything. He instinctively needed a mother's embrace and protection. He mumbled and unknowingly he fell asleep. Perhaps he would wake up or perhaps he would sleep forever. 3 days later Xiaoqi woke up. However, from then on Xiaoqi didn't eat anymore. At first he vomited whenever he saw food. He couldn't eat anymore. Later, when he was hungry, he wanted to eat. However, no matter what he ate, he would vomit it out immediately. Even he couldn't control it. He didn't know why. Elder Ling had said that this was the demonic disease he had contracted. Xiaoqi didn't believe it, but his father also said that this was his illness. Xiaoqi believed him. Xiaoqi could only drink medicine. He no longer ate it 3 times a day. He drank it whenever he was hungry. No matter how bitter the medicine was, he drank it with relish. He never vomited. Gradually, Xiaoqi learned how to drink medicine. Without a teacher, he could identify the medicinal properties of dozens of herbs. Thus, he began to study medicine. Without a teacher to teach him, he compared the medicine to the books and tested it himself. He easily grasped the properties of various herbs. He even began to experiment with making and growing medicine. Gradually, he grew up and no longer stubbornly wanted to see his father. He understood the significance of the 2 titles, the head of the medical academy and the head of the council of elders. He understood the influence his status had on his father's future and the contributions he made to the medical community. He saw his father a few times. When no one was around, he would secretly call him Dad. When outsiders were around, he would remain silent. He no longer wanted to see his father. Instead, he wanted to help his father and the medical academy save more people. In the blink of an eye, 6 years had passed. In these 6 years, he had cultivated nearly 100 new herbs, far more than any other clan in Medicine City. These new herbs had saved countless people from the torment of illness and even death. He was 12 years old. It was the 7th of the 7th month. On this day, Elder Ling took him into seclusion to study medicine. However, as soon as they entered the secret room, Elder Ling ordered people to tie him up. "Elder Ling, what is the meaning of this?" 12-year-old Xiaoqi's voice was still tender, but it was sharp. "Xiaoqi, don't be rude." A familiar voice rang out. Little Seven turned around and saw that it was his father, Dean Gu. He shook his head in shock, his mind blank. "Dad, Academy head Gu ignored him and walked over to a long table with a bowl of black soup. Xiaoqi immediately knew that it was poison, but he didn't know what kind of poison it was. Dad, what are you doing? Academy head Gu carefully sniffed the bowl of poison. After confirming that there was no mistake, he handed it over. Be good, Chiner. Drink this. Academy head Gu probably still thought that Xiaoqi was a naive child who didn't know anything. Xiaoqi pursed his lips and stared at his father. Tears were about to fall from his eyes. He seemed to understand what was going on, but at the same time he didn't seem to understand at all. Academy head Gu didn't force him, but he handed the bowl of poison to Elder Ling. Elder Ling forced his mouth open and stuffed a metal tube into his mouth. Then he forced the poison down his throat and forced him to swallow it. This wasn't a true poison, nor was it medicine. It was called a medicinal poison, something that could make people sick. In less than 2 hours the medicinal poison took effect. Xiaoqi's entire body was covered in red spots. The itch was unbearable, and his entire body burned as if he had a high fever. This was leprosy poison. Xiaoqi finally understood what his father and Elder Ling were doing. His eyes filled with tears as he stared at his father, stubbornly refusing to speak. Unfortunately, his father didn't care about the tears in his eyes. He only cared about the changes in his body. They didn't give Xiaoqi any medicine for 3 whole days. They observed the changes in his condition. The fever didn't subside and the itch was worse. They let go of one of Xiaoqi's hands so that he could scratch the itch. Then they observed the scratches. No matter how stubborn he was, he couldn't stop the disease. Xiaoqi was dizzy from the fever. He scratched unconsciously, and in less than a day his arms and stomach were torn apart. It was a shocking sight. Finally they began to use medicine. At that time there was no clear cure for leprosy. They used Xiaoqi as an experiment. They used one medicine at a time, and each medicine had to be tested for 2 days. They tried for an entire month before they finally found the most effective acupuncture technique and prescription. At the age of 12, Xiaoqi was as thin as a skeleton. His entire body was covered in cuts and bruises. He was no different from a corpse. When his fever subsided, he slowly raised his head and called out in his childish voice, "Father, kill Xiaoqi then." Chapter 560. Kill Xiaoqi? Academy head Gu looked at Xiaoqi doubtfully as if he didn't understand him. Say that again. Daddy, kill Xiaoqi, kill me Xiaoqi. The child's pleas moved everyone, but the 2 leading figures of Cloud Realm Medical Academy who saved countless lives every year remained indifferent and cold-blooded to the extreme. Academy head Gu even laughed in disbelief. Xiaoqi, Daddy worked so hard to get you. Why should I kill you? Do you know how much time and effort Daddy spent on you? You're joking with Daddy, aren't you? Little 7, Daddy knows that you're feeling terrible, but if you're the only one feeling terrible, Daddy will be able to help countless patients reduce their pain and save their lives. Daddy is proud of you. Xiaoqi had no words to reply. He looked at his beloved Daddy, the only family he had in his life, and suddenly felt like a stranger. No matter what he was afraid of before, he still had his Daddy. But now Xiaoqi was most afraid of his Daddy. The tears that had been welling up in his eyes finally fell without a sound. Xiaoqi pursed his lips, not daring to cry out loud. He was so scared. Academy head Gu grew anxious at the sight of Xiaoqi crying. He quickly wiped away the boy's tears. Xiaoqi, be good. Xiaoqi, don't cry. Daddy's here. He was still as gentle and kind as before, carefully wiping away Xiaoqi's tears with his fingertips. Xiaoqi, be good. Daddy's here, don't cry. Daddy's always here. Daddy will always be by your side. As soon as he said this, little 7 suddenly burst into tears. It was incomparably mournful. The companionship he once craved had now become a curse he feared the most. His child, all he could do was cry. He didn't want his daddy anymore. He didn't want his daddy anymore. But he couldn't bear to say it out loud. If he didn't want his daddy anymore, who else could he want? Xiaoqi cried for a long time. Off to the side, Grand Elder Ling was getting annoyed, but Academy head Gu remained patient and placated him. There was no doubt that Dean Gu's patience was abnormal. Like a madman, he firmly believed that he could pacify Xiaoqi. However, the more he tried to appease him, the more scared Xiaoqi became and the more he struggled. The sealed stone room was filled with screams and cries. Suddenly, a crisp paw sound was heard. Xiaoqi's crying stopped abruptly. Dean Gu slapped Xiaoqi hard across the face and said sternly, "That's enough." As soon as he finished speaking, he signaled for Grand Elder Ling to continue using the poison. Of course, they wouldn't just experiment with one kind of poison. They had already prepared at least 100 kinds of poison. They would use all of them on Xiaoqi to find the most satisfactory result. For the next 2 years, Xiaoqi was locked up in this secret room, suffering from the pain day and night, repeating the process of being sick and being treated. Without exception, he suffered from all sorts of incurable illnesses. The inhumane torment was indescribable. At first, little Seven would still cry, but gradually, there were no more tears in his clear eyes. There was only resentment, endless resentment. 2 years later, a rare epidemic swept through Cloud Realm continent. Despite the combined efforts of the Medical Academy and Medicine City, the epidemic only grew worse and worse. All of Cloud Realm continent grew fearful. Academy head Gu found a few cases to follow up on, but none of them yielded any significant results. In the end, he chose to treat Xiaoqi. Xiaoqi's body was different from the average person's. Diseases spread rapidly in his body, and his body was highly resistant to diseases. He wouldn't die easily. But this time Xiaoqi had almost died. His condition was more serious than any of the other patients. He seemed to have fallen into a deep coma and didn't react to any of Academy head Gu or Grand Elderling's provocations. Academy head Xiaoqi couldn't have. Grand Elderling didn't get to finish before Academy head Gu's angry glare cut him off. Just like when Xiaoqi was born, Academy head Gu had been terrified. He'd watched over Xiaoqi for days without rest, thinking of ways to save his life. But this time Xiaoqi didn't get better. Instead, he's not breathing. Grand Elderling exclaimed. Academy head Gu sprang to his feet. Actually, he had known since last night that Xiaoqi's pulse was very weak, but he didn't dare admit it. He reached out with a trembling hand to check Xiaoqi's breathing but didn't dare. Academy head, the child really isn't breathing. Compared to Academy head Gu's madness, Grand Elderling was very calm and rational. Academy head Gu dropped his hand and muttered, "He's dead?" "Yes," Grand Elderling replied. Academy head Gu fell to the ground as if he'd lost his soul. He stared blankly at the floor, unmoving. Academy head Ling sat down beside him. Academy head, since he's dead, we should get rid of his body as soon as possible. After all, he was infected with the plague. Academy head Gu was silent for a long time. Finally, he began to talk about the past. He talked about how he'd found many pregnant women and promised them a large sum of money as long as they cooperated with his medicine, but they all turned him down. He talked about how he didn't love Xiaoqi's mother at all, and how he'd only forced himself to have that one-night stand with Xiaoqi. He talked about how he'd forced himself in the poison sex forbidden grounds, how he'd suppressed his impatience to play with Xiaoqi. He talked about how he'd planned to reap the rewards from Xiaoqi. Head Elder Ling listened quietly without interrupting. Academy head Gu continued to murmur, reminiscing endlessly about the past. He spoke from dusk to dawn. They sat cross-legged on the ground right in front of Xiaoqi. In the darkness, they were immersed in their memories, but they didn't realize that Xiaoqi had long opened his slanted eyes behind them. He'd been listening the entire time. He'd already stopped breathing and his pulse showed that he was dead. But he was still alive and well and he could feel the pain clearly. He didn't know why either. Actually, there weren't many whys. He was a monster to begin with. He'd been a monster since he was in his mother's womb. Why would there be so many whys? Xiaoqi was already 14 years old by now. He was no longer as delicate as he'd been when he was a child. Instead, he was pure and youthful, and his youthful spirit was gradually showing. His facial features were no longer delicate, but his beauty was enough to topple cities. Especially his long, narrow eyes, which were narrowed dangerously and filled with overflowing malice. They were like a beauty poison, enchanting yet deadly. In the darkness, he was strapped to a cross. He was clearly a prisoner, but he looked like a lofty, vengeful demon. His slanted eyes narrowed as he looked disdainfully at the two old men at his feet. As he stared, his blood-soaked lips suddenly curved into a cold, evil smile. It was full of self-mockery and pain. Those 6 years in the poison sect, the memories he'd carefully stored away, the past he'd yearned for, had all been nothing but a conspiracy. So unbearable to think about. His entire life had been nothing but someone else's scheme. He'd started reminiscing when he was 6 years old and had been tortured for 8 whole years. Gu Yuntian, just you wait. One day I'll make you regret giving birth to a monster like me. Gu Yuntian had taught him poison since he was young. Why did the esteemed head of the medical academy know poison? He'd lived in Head Elderling's courtyard since he was young. How could the shady dealings of the medical academy escape his eyes? In the past, he'd never taken these matters seriously. But now they'd become bargaining chips for his future revenge. One day he wouldn't just destroy Gu Yuntian, he'd destroy the medical academy, the place where he'd been born, raised, and harmed. As Academy Head Gu spoke, he fell asleep. Head Elder Ling sighed and got up. He'd already ordered people to take care of Xiaoqi's body, but when he checked Xiaoqi's pulse, he found that it was back to normal. Academy Head. Head Elder Ling's startled cry echoed through the secret room. Academy Head Gu woke up from his sleep, but before he could stand he heard Head Elder Ling cry out, "Academy Head, Xiaoqi isn't dead. He's not dead." Academy Head Gu jumped in fright and hurriedly checked Xiaoqi's breathing. He found that Xiaoqi really was breathing. He hurriedly checked Xiaoqi's pulse and found that it was back to normal. However, this didn't refer to his original pulse, but to Xiaoqi's normal pulse. His plague was cured. The strange pulse he'd had from eating medicine all year round had disappeared as well. What's going on? Academy Head Gu and Head Elder Ling looked at each other in shock. The two of them hurriedly put Xiaoqi down and took turns examining him. Everything is normal. How can this be? Head Elder Ling was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. Academy Head Gu's brows were tightly knitted, his expression solemn as he repeated the word impossible over and over again. He checked Xiaoqi's pulse, body, and even used a few acupuncture techniques. Unfortunately, the results were the same. Aside from his pale complexion and weak pulse, the youth lying on the bed looked no different from a normal person. If not for the fact that they looked the same, Academy Head Gu would have suspected that this wasn't his Xiaoqi, but someone else's child. Is he unconscious? Grand Elder Ling murmured. Recalling what he had said last night, Academy Head Gu immediately pulled out the dagger he had hidden under his clothes and tried to kill Xiaoqi. However, just as he was about to stab Xiaoqi, he stopped himself. Just as he'd said, he couldn't bear to give up on this hard-won child. In the end he said, "Let's wait and see." For the next 3 days the two of them watched over Xiaoqi without rest. Unfortunately, other than being unconscious, Xiaoqi was completely normal. Academy Head Gu was unwilling and Head Elder Ling was worried. The two of them began using all sorts of cruel methods to try and wake Xiaoqi up, testing whether Xiaoqi was faking it. The cruelest thing was that they pierced Xiaoqi's fingernails with golden needles. All 10 of his fingernails were pierced into the golden needles, but Xiaoqi didn't even frown, let alone move. How could it not hurt? He'd been in pain for 8 whole years. It wasn't that he wasn't afraid of pain anymore, but that he'd become extremely sensitive to it. Only his overflowing hatred forced him to endure it. He had to endure it. After such cruel torture, Xiaoqi didn't wake up. Academy Head Gu and Head Elder Ling finally believed that Xiaoqi was really unconscious. But why had Xiaoqi come back from the dead? Why had he been unconscious? Why had he returned to normal? The two of them pondered over it day and night, but they couldn't figure it out. What were they supposed to do with an unconscious Xiaoqi? It would be a pity to abandon him, but there was no possibility of experimenting with him. Instead, it would be dangerous. Chapter 561. What should they do now that Xiaoqi was back to normal but still unconscious? Everyone in the medical academy knew that Head Elder Ling had taken Xiaoqi into closed-door cultivation to study medicine. 2 years had passed since then, and many people were asking when Xiaoqi would come out of closed-door cultivation. After all, Xiaoqi had developed a large batch of new medicines for the medical world. He was a freak of nature and almost everyone in the medical world knew of him. There were many who were concerned about him. If they killed Xiaoqi, they could just say that he had died of a plague that couldn't be cured. It was a safe bet, but Academy Head Gu couldn't bear to do it. He had always hoped that Xiaoqi's body could return to normal and continue working for him in the medical world. Moreover, he wouldn't kill Xiaoqi so easily before he figured out why Xiaoqi's body had changed so drastically. Keeping Xiaoqi alive wasn't a long-term solution. What if the child fell into someone else's hands one day? What if the child heard Academy Head Gu's memories from that night? What if he learned about the past? Just as Academy Head Gu was at a loss for what to do, Xiaoqi suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was as pure and clean as ever as he stared curiously at Academy Head Gu and Head Elder Ling. Xiaoqi? Academy Head Gu was both surprised and delighted. Xiaoqi, what's wrong? Head Elder Ling pretended to ask. Xiaoqi stared at them for a long time before muttering, Who are you? Academy Head Gu and Head Elder Ling were both surprised by the question, but they quickly exchanged glances and calmed down. They erased Xiaoqi's 6 years in the poison sect's forbidden grounds and told Xiaoqi that he was an abandoned child who had been adopted by the head elder. He was a freak of nature with a special constitution and a huge appetite for medicine. He had developed many new medicines for the medical world. Xiaoqi nodded obediently as he listened. At the end he even affectionately called Head Elder Ling, Daddy. Head Elder Ling was very surprised. After all, this child had refused to call him daddy ever since he entered the medical academy. Not even once in the past 8 years. Academy head Gu was surprised as well. Daddy belonged exclusively to him. He was Xiaoqi's world. After being locked up here for 2 years, Xiaoqi had long stopped calling him. Now, this stubborn child had easily called out the 2 words, daddy. From the looks of it, he didn't seem to be faking amnesia. However, Academy head Gu and head elder Ling didn't believe him so easily. They let Xiaoqi out and let him enter the courtyard as he pleased. Xiaoqi didn't run away. Instead, he came in to ask for food. Father, I'm hungry. He looked at head elder Ling, completely ignoring Academy head Gu. Xiaoqi, you can only take medicine. Chief Ling personally brought over a bowl of medicinal soup. Xiaoqi took a sip and spat it out. It's so bitter. I don't want it. Spotting the pastries on the side, he pounced over and ate them in big mouthfuls. Unexpectedly, he didn't spit it out this time. He didn't reject food at all, acting just like a normal person. Academy head Gu and head elder Ling watched with trepidation, complicated expressions on their faces. Xiaoqi chewed on the pastries with relish, tears streaming down his cheeks. He could finally eat normally. Finally. 8 years. He hadn't eaten anything for 8 whole years. He could only take medicine. No one knew how many times he'd secretly tried to eat, but every time he'd spit it out. He'd thought he'd never be able to eat again. After all, they were all obsessed with medicine their whole lives. They didn't have many cunning thoughts. Seeing Xiaoqi's reaction, Academy head Gu and head elder Ling no longer suspected Xiaoqi. That's good, head elder Ling said in a low voice. Then we can keep him here. Academy head Gu sighed in relief. Head elder Ling hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, Academy head, I have a plan. Compared to Academy head Gu, head elder Ling wasn't as crazy about Xiaoqi. He was much calmer and more clear-headed. No one could guarantee that Xiaoqi wouldn't lose his memories forever, nor could they guarantee that Xiaoqi's body would always be normal. Moreover, there were many people in the medical world who cared about Xiaoqi. They had to have a backup plan. Head elder Ling quickly announced that Xiaoqi had come out of seclusion. He didn't publicize Xiaoqi's memory loss. After all, Xiaoqi had lived in his courtyard for the past 8 years. He hadn't interacted with outsiders, nor did he have any friends. No one could tell if Xiaoqi had lost his memories or not. He brought Xiaoqi back to his courtyard. Aside from not taking medicine for 3 meals a day, everything else was normal. Although Xiaoqi had lost his memories, he hadn't forgotten his medicinal skills. He was still the same as before, hiding in the small herb garden in the back courtyard to work on his precious herbs. Whether it was facing Academy head Gu or head elder Ling, his eyes were as clear and pure as before. However, there was no difference between Academy head Gu and head elder Ling. Xiaoqi's former purity was because there was only his father in his world. Now he was pure because there was no one else in his world, only hatred. Just like that, everything went on as before for a month. One day Xiaoqi suddenly discovered poison in his beloved herb garden. He casually picked it up, a trace of disdain flashing through his eyes. Soon he rushed over to head elder Ling with the poison in hand. Father. Poison. It's poison. Head elder Ling had naturally arranged for the poison to be present. Head elder Ling was shocked, then he snorted, Xiaoqi, how did you know this was poison? How did he know? Academy head Gu had taught him since he was young, of course. However, he had to pretend that he had lost his memories. I don't know either, Xiaoqi said innocently, then added, but it really is poison. Guards, capture Xiaoqi and bring him to the academy head. Head elder Ling ordered cold. Father, Xiaoqi was stunned. He was acting so well, just like when he'd seen his biological father hanging in the secret chamber. He was at a complete loss, unable to understand. I'm not your father. I don't have a son like you. Head elder Ling's acting was even more genuine than his son's. Head elder Ling quickly brought Xiaoqi to see academy head Gu. At the same time, head elder Ling summoned the vice academy heads and the elders of the council of elders. The upper echelons of the medical academy were gathered to interrogate Xiaoqi. Speak, how did you identify this poison? Who taught you the art of poison? Aside from planting poison in the medicine fields, where else did you plant poison? Did you hide it? Xiaoqi, have you ever been to the poison sect's forbidden grounds? Xiaoqi, are you in cahoots with the remnants of the poison sect? Xiaoqi could confidently answer each question, but he either remained silent or said, I don't know. These questions were like knives that stabbed into little Seven's heart. The white knife went in and the red knife came out. Shao Qi inadvertently glanced at the high and mighty academy head Gu, who hadn't said a word this entire time. He felt so uncomfortable that he found it hard to breathe. Father, weren't you the one who gave me all of this? At the end of the interrogation they even used torture. But Shao Qi still shook his head. I don't know. Head Elder Ling even went as far as to put righteousness before family. He provided some so-called evidence to slander Shao Qi for stealing large amounts of precious medicinal ingredients over the years, suspecting that Shao Qi had used them to trade with the remnants of the poison sect. Finally, Academy head Gu spoke up. Shao Qi secretly studied poison and stole medicinal ingredients. His heart isn't in the right place. For these 2 crimes he shall be expelled from the medical academy and banned from entering it forever. The crime of secretly studying poison was enough to seal Shao Qi's fate. Why did head Elder Ling add on the crime of theft? Poison was a taboo in the medical academy, so it wasn't convenient to publicize this crime. However, the expulsion of Little Qi had to be made public. Therefore, in the end, Little Qi was expelled from Medical City for the crime of stealing precious medicinal herbs for profit. When the news spread, the entire medical community was shaken. Smart people knew that things weren't as simple as they seemed, but the Council of Elders was very tight-lipped and forbade the disciples from discussing the matter. Thus, ghost genius Shao Qi's expulsion became a taboo in the medical academy, a mystery. On the day of his expulsion, Shao Qi was released. His clothes were tattered and his body was riddled with wounds. He dragged his tired and aching body out of the medical academy's gates. Countless onlookers had gathered to watch, blocking both sides of the road so that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Naturally, there were many who pitied Shao Qi, but even more of them mocked him and hid him while he was down. For the past 8 years, the taciturn Shao Qi had been labeled as arrogant and cold. Most of the medical academy's disciples were proud and came from good backgrounds. They had always disdained Shao Qi and were waiting for the day when Shao Qi would fall out of favor. What ghost genius? So he's a thief. Someone in the crowd shouted, causing a burst of laughter. I heard that he's just an adopted son, not the head elder's biological son. To put it bluntly, he's just a bastard picked up. No wonder he could do such a shameful thing. He's a disgrace to the medical academy. Mockery, sarcasm, all kinds of harsh words, curses, and abuse came from all directions. Shao Qi lowered his head and walked silently. No one could see his expression. Suddenly, an egg was thrown from the crowd and heavily hit his head. This time, there was another burst of thunderous laughter. Shao Qi slowly raised his head and looked at the crowd. He pretended so well that even if there was monstrous hatred, his eyes were still confused. What are you looking at? Are you not convinced? I'm the one who humiliated you. You're just a bastard, how dare you call yourself a ghost genius? What a joke. As the person spoke, he viciously threw another egg. This time, it hit Shao Qi squarely in the face. The egg yolk and white stuck to his face and blurred his vision. Gradually, more and more people started throwing eggs. Shao Qi hadn't even left Medical City yet. His entire face was smeared with egg yolk, making him look extremely miserable. His vision became more and more blurry. He didn't know if it was because there was too much egg yolk in his eyes, or if he was crying. Damn it. Didn't I say I wouldn't cry? Why am I crying? He thought I shouldn't be crying. It's just that my eyes hurt from being hit. The young man who was supposed to be high-spirited and elegant was spurned and chased away in a sorry state. Even after he left the gates of Medical City, many people still chased after him. This time they didn't throw eggs or spit at him but stones instead. Little Seven could only run. She ran desperately into the forest not far away. He knew that Academy head Gu and head Elder Ling's scheme wasn't over yet. They were only putting on this show to give the medical community an explanation. They wouldn't let him off so easily. He had to hurry and escape from Medical City. Chapter 562. As soon as he exited the gates of Medical City, Shao Qi kept running forward, not daring to stop for even a moment. He didn't know where to go, so he just kept moving forward. He only dared to stop and rest when he reached a barren forest. He didn't even have time to sit down before he fell to the ground with a thump. He was just too tired. His surroundings were silent, and only his rapid breathing could be heard. But soon, a few strange insect sounds came from the bushes to the side. Shao Qi was already on high alert, so when he heard these sounds he immediately held his breath. He followed the sound and saw a man in his 40s hiding in the bushes, smiling at him. Shao Qi turned to run without hesitation, but the man rushed out and grabbed him. Shao Qi, I'm Uncle Luo. Have you forgotten? This person was none other than Luo Zuishan. Xiaoqi didn't remember him at all. Unable to struggle, he simply bit down on Luo Zuishan's wrist. Luo Zuishan's heart trembled from the pain, but he couldn't care less. Xiaoqi, hurry and come with me. The head elder sent people to take you back. Xiaoqi, have you really forgotten me? I'm Uncle Luo. 3 years ago you gave me medicinal pills and saved my wife's life. Xiaoqi had some recollection of Luo Zuishan's words, and he recalled everything after careful thought. That time, Luo Zuishan had come to the head elder's courtyard to seek medical treatment. The head elder had written a prescription for Luo Zuishan to go to the Council of Elders to ask for medicine. However, Luo Zuishan was only a minor character and didn't have the qualifications to go to the Council of Elders. Luo Zuishan had knelt and begged the head elder to appear, but the head elder had refused on the grounds that it was inconvenient. Xiaoqi had only given Luo Zuishan a pill in passing and hadn't even said a word to him. He hadn't expected Luo Zuishan to remember his kindness. Hurry and come with me. I know you've been wrongly accused, Luo Zuishan said seriously. Wrongly accused? Xiaoqi's heart suddenly throbbed with grief. Without any hesitation, he hastily fled with Luo Zuishan. Not long after they left, the first elder's men came looking for Xiaoqi. Unfortunately, they couldn't find him even after searching the entire forest. Dean Gu and the first elder were both anxious. They sent more people to search for him for 3 days and 3 nights, but to no avail. Never in their wildest dreams would they have thought that Xiaoqi hadn't gone anywhere and was still hiding in the medical academy. Luo Zuishan said that the most dangerous place was the safest place. Luo Zuishan didn't tell anyone, not even his wife. He cleaned up Xiaoqi very well, gave him a bath, tied up his hair, changed his clothes and even treated Xiaoqi's wounds. Only then did he discover that Xiaoqi's body wasn't just covered in wounds from eggs and stones. There were also countless wounds of various sizes, both old and new. It could be said that he was covered in scales, and there wasn't a single piece of skin left unscathed. Even his fingernails were broken. Luo Zuishan had actually been paying attention to Xiaoqi all these years. When he learned that Xiaoqi had been banished for theft, his first thought was that there was something fishy about this matter. He had tried to inquire about it, but unfortunately he hadn't been able to find anything. He didn't care about the real reason Xiaoqi had been banished. He only knew that no matter what mistake Xiaoqi had committed, the first elder wouldn't let him off easily after publicly banishing Xiaoqi. Moreover, it wasn't just the first elder. The various powers of the medical world were definitely watching this child. This child was a rare genius. The value he could create was immeasurable. Seeing Xiaoqi covered in wounds, Luo Zuishan shook his head in heartache. Did the first elder and the others hit you? How could it be just a hit? Xiaoqi lowered his head and didn't say a word. Luo Zuishan's eyes were filled with complex emotions. He was silent for a long time before speaking. Child, I'll send you to Medicine City after this storm blows over. With your skills you won't starve to death. However, you must remember not to tell anyone that you're Xiaoqi from Medical City, understand? Xiaoqi still didn't say anything. Luo Zuishan was afraid that his emotions would become unstable, so he didn't dare to ask too many questions. Who would have thought that he wouldn't be able to find Xiaoqi the next day? He only found a note saying that Xiaoqi had stolen all the money in his room. The note said that it was the money for the medicine from before, so they didn't owe each other anything in the future. Luo Zuishan was both helpless and worried. He didn't dare to alarm anyone and could only search in secret. However, Xiaoqi had left Medical City that very night. He had gone to Medicine City. As the cold wind blew, Gu, who was nestled in a tree branch, curled up and slept restlessly. The moonlight shone on his cheeks, making his profile even more beautiful than usual in the dim light. He turned over a few times and groggily opened his eyes. He looked at the moonlight in the sky, then at his surroundings. He subconsciously touched the corner of his eye and felt a cold, wet spot. He stared blankly at the tears on his fingers. However, he quickly regained his senses. He shook his hand forcefully and cursed, "Fuck." He stood up and stretched lazily as if nothing had happened. Then he jumped down from the tree and disappeared into the darkness. How could the events of the past 10 years be finished with a single dream? Just like the hatred that filled the sky, it wasn't enough to end with just one person. Deep into the night no one could sleep. Even Han Yunxi, who had been sleeping on the bed for a long time, wasn't truly asleep. The mysterious wordless steel on the poison sect's altar kept flashing through her mind, unable to be erased. At first she thought she was dreaming and tried very hard to open her eyes. She wanted to wake up, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't open her eyes. She couldn't even move her hands and feet. People don't know what's happening in a dream. But she clearly remembered that she had fallen asleep and that she was lying on the bed right now. Her consciousness was so clear. Was this not a dream? Just as Han Yunxi was in a state of confusion, the images flashing through her mind suddenly became real. Her surroundings were real. She had returned to the poison sex altar, and the wordless steel was right in front of her. This feeling was the same as when she entered the detoxification space. Had her soul returned to the poison sex altar? The mossy steel gave off a damp, decaying aura. It was like a call from ancient times, beckoning her to come closer. Han Yunxi resisted and even feared it, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the steel. Soon she walked over without realizing it. But as she drew closer, something miraculous happened. She saw rows and rows of words gradually appear on the wordless monument. They were clearly complicated and strangely shaped words, but she could understand them. What was written on the steel was none other than the poison sex poison storage space. Han Yunxi was greatly alarmed. She didn't have time to worry about her fears or why she'd come here in the first place. She even strode over to carefully read the tiny words, afraid that they'd disappear if she was too slow. Reality quickly proved that Han Yunxi was right. The densely packed words on the steel disappeared from left to right at a speed far faster than Han Yunxi could read them. Han Yunxi panicked. She glanced at 10 lines at a time, one by one. Every time she finished a line, it would disappear. She was so nervous that she held her breath, not daring to stop or have any distracting thoughts. She just kept looking. In the end, every time she finished a line, it would immediately disappear. Gradually, the speed at which the words were disappearing surpassed hers. She could only give up on a large section and look at the rest. Hurry! Hurry! Suddenly, her eyes flew open and she shot up from the bed. She found herself in a room in the side courtyard. What altar? What steel? It was all just a dream. Han Yunxi gasped for breath, her heart still racing. As she got off the bed, she recalled the words in her dream. Although she hadn't finished reading the steel, she knew everything that was written on it. This didn't seem to be a dream. The steel recorded that the poison storage space was the poison sect's most powerful existence. Not every direct descendant of the poison sect had a poison storage space. Some people were born with it in their consciousness, while others might not be able to cultivate it even after decades of cultivation. Some people relied on their powerful consciousness to open the poison storage space, while others carried it with them their entire lives without knowing it. They would never be able to open it. The poison storage space didn't just have the ability to store poison. It had 3 main functions, and the poison storage space was only the first. The first stage was called poison storage. It allowed the user to freely store their own poisons as well as the world's most poisonous things. The second stage was called enemy resistance. It allowed the user to freely store poisons that posed a threat to themselves. The third stage was called strategy. It allowed the user to freely store any poison in the world. Each stage had its own detailed cultivation rules. For example, the first stage cultivated the strength of one's consciousness. The stronger one's consciousness, the easier it would be to store poison, and the easier it would be to store it. Conversely, one would experience dizziness, fainting, and other symptoms. They might even fail to store poisons that were too strong or had too much poison. Han Yunxi carefully recalled the records and found that they were basically the same as her own. She had a naturally unyielding personality, and with the existence of the detoxification system, her consciousness was strong to begin with. Thus, she had accidentally opened the poison storage space. Because she lacked a systematic cultivation, her consciousness wasn't strong enough to freely store it, and she had fainted several times. Han Yunxi increasingly felt that this wasn't a dream, but a kind of inheritance. Because she had the detoxification space, she had been chosen by the wordless steel to inherit the poison sect's strongest cultivation manual. Thinking up to here, Han Yunxi hurriedly returned to the couch and sat cross-legged. She cultivated the strength of her consciousness according to the rules in her memories. Although she couldn't achieve results so quickly, she felt much better after meditating for an hour. It was as if she'd had a good night's sleep, and her body was full of energy. It's not a dream, she muttered to herself, certain but also shocked. She had thought that the detoxification system she had with her was already strong enough. She hadn't expected the poison storage space to have such a trick. Once she reached the second stage, would she be able to directly store the poison in her space without needing to do anything if someone poisoned her? After all, the poison sect's poison storage space didn't have the ability to identify poisons, but her detoxification system did. As for the third stage, she could freely store poisons in the world. This was a heaven-defying ability. If she wanted to store all poisons in the world with just the poison storage space, she would need to have a strong ability to identify poisons. But for Han Yunxi, the detoxification system could take care of everything for her. It had to be said that with the poison storage space and the detoxification system combined, Han Yunxi would really be invincible in the world of poisons. Even if a direct descendant of the poison sect with a poison storage space appeared, they wouldn't be her match. Chapter 563. Unraveling the secret of the poison storage space in a single night was probably Han Yunxi's greatest gain from her trip to the poison storage space. She hadn't seriously considered whether there were other direct descendants of the poison sect in this world, or whether there was someone else who carried such a powerful space with them. The first person she thought of was Jun Yixia. Once she cultivated to the second level, she'd definitely be able to beat Jun Yixia into a sorry state and leave him dumbfounded. Why did Han Yunxi think of Jun Yixia first? Because of personal grudges, and because Jun Yixia was the most arrogant person in the poison world. Seeing that the sky was still dark, Han Yunxi hurriedly sat down to meditate and cultivate. At the same time, Long Feiyi was lying on the roof, staring blankly at the sky. His gaze was deep and solemn. He'd been pondering the entire night. Perhaps it was the witch ant's words about the Nether clan's nobility, or perhaps it was Gu's words, or perhaps it was the inexplicable fire that had been extinguished. Or perhaps it wasn't because of any of these things. He was simply pondering how to deal with the Chu clan and how to disrupt Western Zhou's peace. Long Fei's handsome brows were locked in a serious and solemn manner, making him seem even colder than before. It was impossible to offend him or guess his thoughts. Suddenly, a figure leapt onto the roof. It was none other than Tang Li. He carried 2 jugs of wine over and tossed one to Long Feiyi. "Big bro, drink with me?" Long Feiyi's alcohol tolerance was unknown, but he wasn't fond of alcohol. He casually set the jug aside and didn't say a word. Tang Li was already a little tipsy. He sat down next to Long Feiyi and muttered, "Big bro, do you think that woman needs to do this? I don't even like her, so why does she have to marry me?" Tang Li had been sullen ever since he'd run away from his marriage. Besides relying on Long Feiyi, he had nowhere else to go. Long Feiyi didn't even look at him. He was immersed in his own thoughts. Tang Li leaned close to him and whispered, "Bro, I'll just find a random woman, give birth to 2 babies and bring my family home. Let's see what my father can do to me then. Actually, if they didn't push me so hard, I might have gone back by myself. The more they search the world for me, the more I don't want to go." Finally, Long Feiyi stood up and looked over. Tang Li burped and laughed. "You want to say that I'm childish, right?" "Wrong." Long Feiyi didn't say anything. He grabbed Tang Li's hand and suddenly flew into the air. When he let go, Tang Li fell from a high place. The pain made him sober up a little. Only then did Long Feiyi open his mouth and say coldly, "I dare you to go and disturb Han Yunxi again." Tang Li was stunned. Only then did he realize that Han Yunxi was sleeping in the room. So this guy was keeping watch for her. Long Feiyi had already walked far away, but Tang Li still chased after him and pulled him back. He whispered, "Bro, you still? No, you still?" Tang Li spoke for a long time but couldn't finish his sentence. Long Feiyi's expression had already changed. "Let go of me. Bro, just one sentence. The 2 of you should hurry up and give birth to a baby. I guarantee that my father and Aunt Ru won't dare to have any thoughts about Han Yunxi again." Tang Li said seriously. Long Feiyi's face darkened. He kicked Tang Li into a pool not far away to sober up. As for whether Tang Li's suggestion caused ripples in Long Feiyi's heart, only he knew. In short, his brows, which had been tense all night, finally relaxed. After dealing with the Chu family when the ice and snow melted next year, he would definitely go to Tianshan. The next day, Han Yunxi was the first to discover that Gu had disappeared. Could it be that he left last night? Han Yunxi asked suspiciously. Gu, whom she had been unable to chase away, suddenly left without saying goodbye. This made her feel a little uneasy. She hadn't even interrogated Chu Tianin yet. Why was that guy in such a hurry to leave? Did something urgent happen? Where did he go? She had thought that it would be easy to get the earth of 10,000 poisons from the poisonous herb storage, so she had told Mu Linger that Gu would be back soon. Now Mu Linger must still be waiting day and night. Waiting in exchange for disappointment was a cruel thing, let alone Mu Linger who had staked everything on waiting. Han Yunxi didn't know how well she knew Gu, but at least from what she knew, Gu must have left because something had happened. "Last night, what happened?" she asked seriously. Tang Li sneezed and shook his head. "I don't know. I drank too much and fell into the lake." Tang Li had indeed drunk too much last night. He had completely forgotten what he had said to Long Fei Yi, and he didn't even remember that he had been kicked. Long Fei Yi was expressionless at Tang Li's words. Long Fei Yi asked Han Yunxi, "Do you have something important to talk to him about?" How could Han Yunxi and Mu Linger tell Long Fei Yi about their little schemes? She shook her head. Long Fei Yi knew what was going on. He didn't ask any more questions and brought Han Yunxi to see Chu Tianyin. Chu Tianyin was locked in a secret room. He was severely injured and hadn't woken up yet. But when Long Fei Yi splashed him with ice water, he immediately opened his eyes. Chu Tianyin was truly a man. Despite his dire straits, there was no fear in his eyes. He arched a brow at Long Fei Yi and spat out a mouthful of dirty water without a word. Long Fei Yi's lips curled into a cold smile. Tang Li, send which ant to the military brothel. Long Fei Yi, come at this young master if you have the guts. What's the big deal about insulting a woman? Chu Tianyin was furious. He didn't know that which ant had already been released back to the Chu clan. You know the earth of 10,000 poisons so well. Is the perplexing butterfly illusion in the Chu clan's hands? Long Fei Yi asked with interest. It was already difficult enough to find the secret underground room of the poison sect's storehouse. Moreover, he knew where the earth of 10,000 poisons was and that it was afraid of fire. He must have some understanding of the perplexing butterfly illusion. Chu Tianyin and Aunt Ru had searched for a long time before finding out that the storehouse contained clues to unraveling the perplexing butterfly illusion. Long Fei Yi suspected Chu Tianyin, and Chu Tianyin suspected Long Fei Yi as well. When he met Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi in the underground palace, he suspected that they were after the perplexing butterfly illusion. In fact, he even suspected that the perplexing butterfly illusion was in their hands. But Long Fei Yi's question dispelled Chu Tianyin's suspicions. The perplexing butterfly illusion was the poison sect's most precious treasure. It had been missing for so many years, so it was unlikely that it was in Long Fei Yi's hands. Chu Tianyin was shrewd, intelligent, and calm. Unfortunately, he couldn't compare to a wily old fox like Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi's question was precisely to dispel Chu Tianyin's suspicions. No, the Duke of Qin must be after the perplexing butterfly illusion as well. The one who obtains the perplexing butterfly illusion obtains the world. If the Duke of Qin's ambition is to conquer the world, why refuse the invitation of the central and southern regions? Doesn't the Duke of Qin feel that he's being very hypocritical? Chu Tianyin laughed coldly. The various powers of Tianning's central and southern regions had banded together to form the Commander-in-Chief's estate to support the Duke of Qin in his bid to establish a nation. Unfortunately, the Duke of Qin had ignored them to this day. All of Cloud Realm Continent's powers were paying close attention to the matter and trying to figure out what to do next. Unfortunately, no one could figure out Long Fei Yi's intentions. That was the same as not understanding Tianning's true situation. The Chu clan wanted to use Chu Qingge's child to seize the throne and gain a foothold in Tianning. Then they could use that foothold to fight for the rest of Tianning. Thus, the Chu clan was paying closer attention to Long Fei Yi's movements than anyone else. Chu Tianyin was still too inexperienced to try to goad Long Fei Yi into action. Long Fei Yi didn't reply, but Han Yunxi laughed first. Chu Tianyin, you're overestimating the central and southern regions too much. The Duke of Qin didn't refuse them. He's just ignoring them. Chu Tianyin's fist had landed on cotton, making him gloomy. Whoever obtains the perplexing butterfly illusion will obtain the world. That's why your Western Zhou's Chu clan has ambitions for the world as well. It looks like your lordship really needs to have a good chat with Western Zhou's emperor. Long Fei Yi's words were casual, but Chu Tianyin grew alarmed. Long Fei Yi arched a brow and looked over. Aside from the earth of 10,000 poisons, what else did you find? Chu Tianyin fell silent. Long Fei Yi wouldn't allow that. Your lordship's patience is limited. Don't regret it. His warning from before was still ringing in his ears. Which aunt was Chu Tianyin's mother's older sister and his aunt? He would never allow anything to happen to her. Moreover, which aunt had gone to great lengths to find out everything about the perplexing butterfly illusion. It was worth it to use it to save her. I didn't find anything, Chu Tianyin intoned. But I do know the whereabouts of 3 other things. Release which aunt and I'll tell you. Speak, Long Fei Yi agreed easily. I want to see which aunt first. Chu Tianyin was very serious. Long Fei Yi was even more straightforward. If you want to talk, then talk. If you don't, then forget it. Chu Tianyin clearly had bargaining chips, but he was completely suppressed by Long Fei Yi's domineering aura. This was the first time in his life that he'd felt so stifled and sullen, but he had no choice but to admit it. This one believes that the Duke of Qin is not someone who goes back on his word. Chu Tianyin threw down these words, then continued, "There's also the water of 10,000 poisons, wood of 10,000 poisons and poison beast blood. The water of 10,000 poisons is a poisonous pond in Medicine City's medicine forest, but its whereabouts are unknown. The wood of 10,000 poisons is on a 1,000-year-old ginkgo tree in Western Zhou's Thousand Buddha Cave. As for which piece it is, I'm not sure. The poison beast blood is the tooth blood of the poison sex poison beast. There are rumors that the poison beast blood has gone missing, but it's hard to tell if it's true or false." Han Yunshi sat to the side, gently stroking the sleeping little thing in her sleeve. Although there were 3 things, only one was useful to them. But one was enough. "On a ginkgo tree? What do you mean?" Long Fei asked. "I'm not sure. The ginkgo tree in Western Zhou's Thousand Buddha Cave isn't easy to find." Chu Tianyin was telling the truth. Thousand Buddha Cave was Western Zhou's holy land. It was open only to grand ceremonies, and even grand ceremonies were only open to members of the imperial family and a few clans. The 1,000-year-old ginkgo tree was also a place for monks to cultivate, so it wasn't easy to get close. "Duke of Qin, I've told you everything I know. Can you let Wuchang go now? You're a man, don't go back on your word." Chu Tianyin was very anxious. Tang Li, who had been standing to the side this entire time, couldn't help but laugh. "Eldest young Master Chu, the Duke of Qin let her go last night. He's a man of his word, isn't he?" Chu Tianyin finally realized that he'd been played. He was both embarrassed and angry, but he didn't lose his reason. His first thought was, why did Long Fei let Wuchang go? "Long Fei, what exactly are you trying to do?" he asked. Long Fei didn't answer. Instead, he asked thoughtfully, "If the Chu clan's ambition is to rule the world, who should this prince talk to?" Chu Tianyin was so shocked by these words that he almost couldn't speak. He didn't want to say anything because there was no point in saying anything in this situation. It would only reveal more. Long Fei glanced at Han Yunshi out of the corner of his eye. He saw Han Yunshi's curious expression. This woman was always so curious about the 7 noble families. Fortunately, she didn't know the truth. Long Fei didn't have time to waste with Chu Tianyin. He asked coldly, "Apart from the Nether clan, who else of the 7 noble families are there?" Chapter 564. The whereabouts of the 7 noble families? For the first time, Chu Tianyin realized that Long Fei was also interested in the 7 noble families. "Since the Duke of Qin knows that I'm from the Nether clan, I presume you've investigated the 7 noble families?" Chu Tianyin probed. A smart person would be able to find clues in the other party's words, sound them out, and deduce information. Long Fei was well aware of Chu Tianyin's probing. His identity as the East Qin orphan would not be easily exposed. If Western Zhou's Emperor Kangqing knew of your Chu clan's background, before Long Fei could finish, Chu Tianyin became anxious and cut him off. Cold voice, "Long Fei, since you're here to negotiate, then be straightforward and stop beating around the bush." Han Yunshi felt very uncomfortable when she heard this. Long Fei was the last person in the world to beat around the bush. He didn't have that much patience. It was clearly Chu Tianyin who was avoiding the topic and beating around the bush. She was about to interrupt, but Tang Li was even more unhappy than she was. He sneered, "Chu Tianyin, get your facts straight. The Duke of Qin is interrogating you, not chatting with you. Do you really think you're some big shot just because he's chatting with you?" Chu Tianyin didn't know if he was really calm or just thick-skinned, but he wasn't embarrassed at all. He even confidently said, "Long Fei, what will it take for you to release me? State your conditions." He avoided the topic of the 7 noble families with a few words, but Long Fei didn't forget. Long Fei scrutinized Chu Tianyin. He couldn't help but admit that Chu Tianyin was the calmest captive he had ever seen. However, a captive was still a captive. "This prince has no intention of releasing you. Tell me everything you know about the 7 noble families or else." Chu Tianyin ignored Long Fei's warning once again. He cold voice said, "Unless you release me, don't even think about prying open this young master's mouth." He had just been played for a fool about the witch ant, so how could he be played again? Furthermore, since witch ant had already escaped, he would not provide any more information to Long Fei. Chu Tianyin pursed his lips, his face fearless. Long Fei wanted to warn others, but now he was the one being warned instead. His patience finally ran out. He turned to look at Tang Li and Han Yunshi and asked coldly, "Which one of you wants to fight? Who's coming?" Whether it was Tang Li's hidden weapons or Han Yunshi's poison, they were more interesting than any of the torture instruments in this secret chamber. He returned to Han Yunshi's side and sat down. He crossed his legs and stretched his long arm over the back of Han Yunshi's chair. His posture was domineering as he looked on coldly. "Let me?" Tang Li had long been rubbing his fists. He'd been depressed about his marriage for a long time, so he wouldn't miss a chance to vent his frustrations. Although Chu Tianyin didn't know the relationship between Tang Li and Long Fei Yi, he was well aware of Tang Li's origins and the power of Tang Li's hidden weapons. Although he felt uneasy, he also rejoiced at the fact that it wasn't Han Yunshi. Han Yunshi's poisons were things he dreaded the most. But before Tang Li could make a move, Han Yunshi spoke up. "Young Master Tang, I don't think you'll be able to get anything out of him. This guy's got a tough bone." "A bet?" Tang Li said without hesitation. If Chu Shifeng was here, he would definitely stop him. No one had a good ending for betting with Han Yunshi. "All right." Han Yunshi agreed happily, while Chu Tianyin's ashen face turned even paler. "Abominable, what do these two take me for? What kind of bet? What are the stakes?" Tang Li was very excited. "Let's bet on whether you can pry open his mouth first, or this Wang Fei." Han Yunshi was interested as well. "And the terms?" Tang Li asked next. "An hour is the limit. As long as he stays alive, you can interrogate him however you want." Chu Tianyin's heart couldn't help but tremble at Long Fei's careless interjection. Still, he forced himself to stay calm and collected. Han Yunshi agreed easily. "All right." Tang Li said seriously, "Didn't we agree that the winner would be the one to pry open his mouth first?" Han Yunshi nodded. "And the stakes?" Tang Li asked again. "As you wish." Han Yunshi's straightforwardness didn't lose to Long Fei's. "If I win, then I owe the Duke of Qin all the silver I owe him?" Tang Li grinned. When he'd run away from his marriage, his father had cut off all his sources of income. He'd relied on his mother's secret support, but when his father found out about her, she didn't dare to give him any more silver. He could only ask Long Fei Yi for help. Even now he owed a buttload of debt. Han Yunshi burst into laughter. "I'll pay you back in your place. You and the Duke of Qin make distinctions between you and me? Isn't everything the Duke of Qin yours?" "He's all yours," Tang Li teased. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything. He drank tea and covered half his face, but his gaze clearly fell on Han Yunshi. Han Yunshi's face was clearly red, but she was still holding her mouth. She asked unhappily, "What if you lose?" "Up to you." Tang Li was also generous. He had nothing to lose anyway. Who knew that Han Yunshi would laugh and say, "If you lose, then I'll order you around for a year. You'll be at my beck and call." "All right." Tang Li was full of confidence. After discussing the terms, the two of them looked at Chu Tianyin. Chu Tianyin was furious. These two were simply insulting his value. Especially Tang Li. How much silver could Tang Li owe Long Fei Yi? Could it be that he, the great young master of the Chu clan, was only worth that much? He wouldn't answer no matter what. He wouldn't answer any of their questions even if he died. Suddenly he sensed a hidden weapon coming at him. He was helpless. His whole body was tied up so he couldn't dodge at all. Soon he felt a sharp pain in his mouth as if something had pierced it. This must be Tang Li's hidden weapon. He didn't know what kind of hidden weapon it was, but he was sure that it had pierced his mouth. Soon he felt a tugging pain. As the pain intensified, the string tied to the hidden weapon became clearer. Only then did Chu Tianyin understand that Tang Li's hidden weapon was tied to a string. One end of the string shot into his mouth, while the other end was tied to Tang Li's hand. As long as Tang Li tugged on the string, he would feel pain. This damn thing. Of all the places to pick, why did he have to pick on his mouth? The hidden weapon pierced so deeply that he couldn't stop drooling from the pain. Chu Tianyin gritted his teeth and endured the pain no matter how hard Tang Li tugged on the string. No matter what Tang Li asked him, he wouldn't answer. If he wanted to tug on the string, then let him. However, Chu Tianyin waited for a long time. Tang Li didn't interrogate him at all. He just pulled harder and harder on the string. Chu Tianyin faintly sensed that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. He was puzzled when his nose suddenly became blocked as if he had a cold. Chu Tianyin felt more and more that something was wrong. He knew that the blocked nose must be caused by Han Yunshi's poison. Han Yunshi couldn't have just blocked his nose. She must have a backup plan. The blocked nose was undoubtedly asking him to open his mouth. Could it be that Han Yunshi wanted to feed him some kind of poison? Chu Tianyin wanted to use the turtle breathing technique, but under the influence of Han Yunshi's poison, the turtle breathing technique was useless. Breathing was something that couldn't be held back. Soon Chu Tianyin opened his mouth. He thought even if Han Yunshi fed him poison, so what? He was determined not to answer any of their questions. who knew that as soon as he opened his mouth, Tang Li would immediately let go and look at Han Yunxi in disbelief. Han Yunxi glanced back and smiled. She was especially beautiful. I won? How did you win? Tang Li asked unwillingly. I told him to open his mouth and breathe. If this doesn't count as prying open his mouth, what does it count as? Han Yunxi asked seriously. When she said this, Chu Tianyin almost collapsed. So this was what they meant by prying open his mouth? He was still foolishly waiting for them to interrogate him. Tang Li wanted to cry but had no tears. He and Han Yunxi were betting on who would pry open Chu Tianyin's mouth first. There were two meanings to this bet. The first was purely to pry open Chu Tianyin's mouth. The second was to have Chu Tianyin answer to their interrogation. He had a little idea. He wanted to trick Han Yunxi and use a concealed weapon to pry open Chu Tianyin's mouth so that he would win and let Han Yunxi slowly interrogate him. Who knew that Han Yunxi didn't jump into this trap and quietly made Chu Tianyin open his mouth. Hey, if you agree to a bet, you have to accept defeat. Long Fei Yi is my witness. You have to be enslaved by me for a year. When he heard the word enslaved from Han Yunxi, Tang Li panicked. He secretly swore that he would never bet with Han Yunxi again. But this time he had to bet until the end. A year it is. Let's bet again. Tang Li said domineeringly. What are we betting on? Han Yunxi didn't refuse. We're betting on who will make him lower his head first. Tang Li said. Chu Tianyin was furious. These two guys weren't interrogating him at all. They were simply toying with him. He glared at them. That's enough. Unfortunately, Tang Li and Han Yunxi ignored him. Han Yunxi readily agreed. What's the bet? If this young master loses, I'll add another year. If you lose, we'll forget about the previous year. Tang Li threw caution to the wind. All right, let's begin. Han Yunxi's voice fell and she immediately made her move. She shot a poison needle at Chu Tianyin's neck. Tang Li wasn't to be outdone. He quickly rushed up. If they wanted Chu Tianyin to lower his head, why would they need to use a concealed weapon? They could just use their hands to pull him. Anyway, Chu Tianyin didn't have any chance of resisting. He was completely like a fish on the chopping board at their mercy. Han Yunxi's poison immediately made Chu Tianyin's neck weak. But he forced himself to hold on. He was being toyed with by them. If he lowered his head again, his dignity would really be fed to the dogs. However, as soon as Tang Li came up, he pressed his head from behind and abruptly pushed it forward. Chu Tianyin's neck was weak to begin with. With such pressure, he couldn't help but lower his head. I won. Tang Li was overjoyed. It doesn't count. You won because I drugged you. Han Yunxi refused to admit it. Who knows you drugged me? Tang Li's large hand pressed firmly on Chu Tianyin's head as he retorted angrily. With a smack, Han Yunxi slapped Chu Tianyin's head and pressed down hard. You know full well what I mean. Thus, the two of them started to quarrel just like that. Long Fei watched with amusement, while Chu Tianyin hung his head in shame and anger. His face was flushed red and his eyes were bloodshot. He was so angry that his eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. Rationality and calmness were secretly thrown to the back of his mind. He roared, that's enough. Han Yunxi, detoxify this young master immediately. Tang Li, let go. I'm warning you to let go, do you hear me? However, Han Yunxi and Tang Li were in full swing in their quarrel and didn't hear him at all. At most, we won't count this time. Let's bet again. Finally, Tang Li gave in. What are we betting on? Han Yunxi asked. Before Tang Li could answer, Chu Tianyin couldn't take it anymore and roared, this young master will answer you. I'll answer everything. Chapter 565. Tang Li and Han Yunxi hadn't said a word before Chu Tianyin surrendered. However, the two of them still ignored him and continued to haggle over the wager. He'd already admitted defeat, so what else did they want? Chu Tianyin had suffered setbacks in his life before, but none like this. As Tang Li and Han Yunxi took turns pressing down on his neck, the soreness and weakness grew until Chu Tianyin grew dizzy. He knew that if this continued, it wouldn't just be a matter of lowering his head, but of becoming a cripple. His neck might never be able to straighten again, and he'd either die or hang his head forever. He could accept losing an arm or a leg, but his neck, Han Yunxi, you win. Chu Tianyin was finally convinced. I only know that the D clan lives in seclusion on the border between Tianning and Western Zhou. They're a merchant clan, but I'm still investigating which clan they are. Chu Tianyin said loudly. At this, Tang Li and Han Yunxi stopped. Actually, Chu Tianyin understood the Shadow clan better than anyone else, but he'd never betray them. For one thing, the Nether clan wouldn't let him off even if he was the eldest son of the Chu clan. In the face of his clan's mission and righteousness, he was willing to give up his life for it, much less be humiliated like this. For another, he was hoping that the Shadow Clan fellow would come save him. That fellow had been very close to Long Fei Yi recently, but the Nether and Shadow clans had been friends for generations. They'd never leave him in the lurch. With that fellow's skills, it was possible for him to rescue him from Long Fei Yi's clutches. Of course, Chu Tianyin would choose to keep quiet if possible, but Long Fei Yi wouldn't believe him if he didn't reveal some valuable information. Thus, he could only reveal the D clan that the Chu clan had painstakingly discovered. The D clan was the only merchant clan of the 7 noble families. Both men and women in the clan were merchants, and their businesses were spread across all of Cloud Realm continent. They were the wealthiest of the 7 noble families. The D clan was loyal to the royal family of Western Qin. It could be said that they were the money bags of the royal family of Western Qin. There were many people in the Great Qin dynasty who wanted to win over the D clan. The merchant clan had always been cunning. They had made friends with all kinds of forces and benefited from both sides. However, when it came to the benefits of the Western Qin royal family, the D clan would not budge an inch. They had secretly offended countless people. During the internal strife of the Great Qin Empire, the D clan was the first noble clan to be suppressed. Their businesses were ruined, and their clansmen were scattered everywhere. In less than 2 years they had disappeared without a trace. Some people said that the D clan had offended too many people and were suppressed by the large forces, causing their wealth to be plundered. Some people said that the D clan was just putting on a show, taking a large amount of wealth to hide among the common people, leaving a way out for their descendants. Some people said that the D clan was destroyed by the East Qin royal family and all their wealth was taken by the East Qin royal family. After the East Qin royal family was destroyed, their wealth was buried in the East Qin royal tomb. In short, there were many theories and it was hard to tell the truth from the lies. At least the matter of the wealth being stolen by the East Qin royal family was fake because Long Fei Yi's wealth was not stolen. And then? Han Yunshi asked. I only know this much. How much my father knows, how much the elders of the family know, that is hard to say. Perhaps you can use me as a bargaining chip to discuss conditions with my father. Chu Tianyin's neck was soft, but his attitude was still firm. If he was locked up, his wool would be worn down. If Long Fei Yi brought him to talk to his father, it would at least be a chance. His father would definitely be able to think of a way to save him. Long Fei Yi sat far away, looking at the man with his head lowered in the darkness. He felt a bit of admiration in his heart, at least he had not given up yet. This fellow, if he was not destined to be his enemy, he could make friends with him. Since he was an enemy, Long Fei Yi had to deal with him quickly, otherwise he would be a big problem in the future. Han Yunshi was not that easy to trick. She deliberately squatted down and looked up at Chu Tianyin. Young Master Chu, if the poison in your neck is not cured in an hour, even if the gods came, they would not be able to raise your head. Do you believe me? I believe. Chu Tianyin said without hesitation. There is still a joss stick's worth of time left. An hour will be up. Think carefully about whether you want to tell me or not. Han Yunshi deliberately had Tang Li light a joss stick at Chu Tianyin's feet. He could see it clearly with his head lowered. A joss stick's worth of time is not short. Take your time to think about the 7 noble families. Han Yunshi stood up after speaking and also stared at the joss stick. The room was silent and dark. The smoke rose in spirals as if time was slowly passing, disappearing into the darkness. Qin Wangfei, why waste time? Chu Tianyin said indifferently. Tang Li only sneered. Han Yunshi and Long Fei Yi did not say anything. Chu Tianyin let out a light laugh and also fell silent. A joss stick's worth of time was not short, but it was also not long. Soon the fire reached the end of the cigarette. It flickered and would be extinguished in a while. Although Chu Tianyin did not make a sound, he could clearly feel the pain in his neck. It was as if there were ants crawling all over his neck and gnawing on it. Han Yunshi glanced at the end of the cigarette and said with a careless smile, "It hurts, doesn't it?" She originally thought that Chu Tianyin would not answer, but he unexpectedly smiled and said, "It does. It hurts a lot." Han Yunshi's eyes flashed with curiosity, but she smiled again. "It's fine. It won't hurt in a while. It won't hurt forever." Of course Chu Tianyin knew what Han Yunshi meant. He also believed that Han Yunshi did not lie to him just now. However, even if his entire body was crippled, let alone his neck, he still could not betray that fellow from the Shadow Clan. That fellow was the only bloodline of the Shadow Clan. If something happened to him, the Shadow Clan would really be finished. The joss stick had reached its end and the fire was about to be extinguished. Han Yunshi was finally sure that Chu Tianyin would not say anything. He would not say anything even if he died. As for how much he knew, she could not figure it out. Actually, she had just lied to Chu Tianyin. After a joss stick's worth of time, even if she did not detoxify the poison, Chu Tianyin's neck would not be completely crippled. After all, Chu Tianyin was the eldest son of the Chu clan. He was very useful. If he really was crippled, how could the Long Fei Yi fight with Western Zhou's Chu clan? Seeing that the time was almost up and the lie was about to be exposed, once Chu Tianyin was sure that they would not really make a move, it would not be easy to pry information out of him. Han Yunshi squatted down again and silently looked at the nearly extinguished cigarette, her eyes dark and gloomy. However, just as she was worrying, Chu Tianyin suddenly opened his mouth. "Qin Wangfei, Su Xiaoyu is still by your side, right? I don't know about the matters of the 7 noble families, but I know very well about Su Xiaoyu's matters." Han Yunshi was overjoyed. She was just thinking about how to get out of this embarrassing situation when Chu Tianyin unexpectedly gave her a way out. In the end, Chu Tianyin still lost this game. "Why did you send Su Xiaoyu to ambush the Duke of Qin's estate? There's not much time left. If you continue to spout nonsense, don't blame me when the time comes," Han Yunshi said coldly, looking for the perplexing butterfly illusion. "When we met in the underground palace, I suspected that you had it. It's just that that stinky girl listened to Chinga's orders and wanted to hurt you for revenge. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been discovered. I've said everything that needs to be said. Can you help me detoxify the poison now?" Chu Tianyin was very anxious, but in reality he was still lying. He was gambling, using his own neck as a stake. Only in such an urgent situation would Han Yunshi believe his words. Only the Nether clan and the Shadow clan knew about the birthmark on the back of Western Qin's legitimate daughter. No one else knew. Han Yunshi believed him. Su Xiaoyu had been in the Duke of Qin's estate for so long, and other than deliberately scalding her and Bailey Mingxiang, she did not have any killing intent. Chu Tianyin's explanation made sense. Moreover, Chu Tianyin was in such a hurry to detoxify the poison, so it was unlikely that he would lie. Han Yunshi took out an antidote and stuffed it into Chu Tianyin's mouth, helping him detoxify the poison. Chu Tianyin inwardly let out a sigh of relief. Although he had been deceived in this game, he had still come out on top. He had protected the Shadow clan and the Western Qin's legitimate daughter's birthmark. Han Yunshi and Tang Li both believed him, but Long Fei Yi did not. If there had to be a real winner, then Long Fei Yi would be the biggest winner. Long Fei Yi had learned about the relationship between the Shadow clan and the Nether clan from Mute Granny. How could he still believe Chu Tianyin's words? Coldly, he looked at Chu Tianyin as his lips curved up into a disdainful smile. He had no plans to expose Chu Tianyin. If Chu Tianyin didn't reveal the Shadow clan, he had his own ways to lure them out. Even if he couldn't, he could use this chance to drive a wedge between the Nether and Shadow clans. After the poison was cured, Chu Tianyin slowly raised his head, only to meet Long Fei Yi's scornful gaze. He avoided the man, not wanting to provoke Long Fei Yi any further. Provoking this man any further would only be asking for trouble. He would endure and wait for the Shadow clan member to show up. Currently, the white-robed gentleman was in Western Zhou's Chu clan's secret room. There were only 2 people inside. One was the white-robed gentleman, while the other wasn't the head of the Chu clan, General Chu, but the head of the Nether clan, Chu Tianyin's uncle, Chu Yuni. Chu Yuni lived up to his reputation as the head of a clan. Even after such a huge event had happened in the Chu clan, he was still calm and collected. He slowly sipped his tea and smiled. "You're still wearing a veil when you're with this old man?" "I'm used to it." The white-robed gentleman was even more relaxed and carefree than he was. "Which aunt and Tianyin went to search for the earth of 10,000 poisons. Yesterday she came back by herself." "Tianyin has fallen into Tianying's Duke of Qin's hands," Chu Yuni said. "Everything was fine, so how did he end up in the Duke of Qin's hands?" The white-robed gentleman was clearly the one who put out the fires in the underground palace, but he pretended to know nothing. Only then did Chu Yuni tell him the whole story. "You're close to the Duke of Qin. If you want to rescue Tianyin, it shouldn't be hard, right? I told you long ago not to provoke the Duke of Qin. Why didn't you listen?" The white-robed gentleman was in a rare fit of temper. Since the Duke of Qin knows about our driving arrow arts, he must be plotting against the 7 noble families. Even if we don't provoke him now, we'll have to. It's not necessarily a bad thing for things to happen now. After all, the Duke of Qin is our greatest enemy. Chu Yuni said seriously. "You and me." What does the Duke of Qin want to take over the world have to do with us? The white-robed gentleman asked. Chu Yuni's eyes flashed with a cold smile, but he remained patient. You might be the only member of the Shadow Clan left, but you can't forget your mission to revive Western Qin. You haven't been living peacefully for so long that you've forgotten about your clan's mission, have you? Clan Head Chu, reviving Western Qin is a matter for the Imperial Clan. The Nether and Shadow clans don't have the right to do so. The white-robed gentleman said coldly. Naturally, we don't have the right, but we have the responsibility to assist you. Over the past few years, my Nether clan has been conserving our strength in Western Zhou while searching for the whereabouts of the Imperial Clan. What about you? Are you planning to hide in Pilfiend Pharmacy and be a doctor for the rest of your life? As Chu Yuni spoke, he seemed to recall something and asked in alarm, could it be that there's someone you want to protect in Pilfiend Pharmacy? Chapter 566. Faced with Chu Yuni's sudden questioning, the white-robed man replied calmly, this junior went for the sake of the perplexing butterfly illusion. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were able to find the poison sect's underground palace. Even if they don't have the perplexing butterfly illusion, they still have plenty of information about it. Chu Yuni studied him for a long time without speaking. The white-robed man remained calm and collected as he slowly drained his cup of tea. Nether Clan Head, this junior hasn't lived a peaceful life yet, so where did that come from? Whoever obtains the perplexing butterfly illusion will obtain the world. This junior is simply doing my best for the sake of Western Qin. Nether Clan Head, are you doubting the loyalty of the Shadow Clan by doubting this junior? The Shadow Clan was the most loyal of the 7 noble families and used their lives to protect the Imperial Clan. None of the other 6 noble families could compare to them, so their loyalty was unquestionable. Chu Yuni immediately denied it. No. Old man was only speaking casually, that's all. He really had asked the question out of the blue. He didn't believe this brat had the guts to hide the truth from him. Moreover, Tianyin had long sent word that Han Yunxi didn't have a birthmark on her body. Chu Yuni had personally sought him out this time not to doubt him, but for Chu Tianyin's sake. Old man has thought over Tianyin's matter and decided to ask you for help, he said seriously. The white-robed man quickly bowed with hands clasped in front. I don't dare. This junior is incompetent and can't shoulder such a heavy responsibility. If he wanted to save him, would he have waited until now? Chu Yuni took his modesty as a sign of modesty. Now's not the time for modesty. Every day Tianyin is imprisoned is another day the Nether clan is in danger. The Duke of Qin only said he was going to pay a visit to Western Zhou, but he didn't mention the Nether clan directly. He must be up to something. If we can save Tianyin, then we will have the strength to contend against them. This junior understands this logic, the white-robed man said seriously. Chu Yuni rejoiced. Then I'll leave this matter to you. Clan leader I've already said that I'm not up to the task. Please find someone else. The white-robed man was still very serious, but Chu Yuni's face had turned black. Ever since the Great Qin dynasty was destroyed, the Nether and Shadow clans had been protecting Western Qin's orphans. They'd never made any distinctions between themselves and treated each other as if they were family. What kind of attitude was this brat showing today? Chu Yuni reassessed the white-robed gentleman. Under his shrewd gaze, the white-robed gentleman was as calm as ever. He reached out a hand and said, Senior, I won't hide it from you. This junior doesn't have many years left to live. It's true that I have the heart but no strength. Please forgive me. Chu Yuni quickly reached out to take his pulse. Although he wasn't a professional doctor, he was a martial arts practitioner who knew how to feel pulses. Only then did he realize that the white-clothed man's pulse was indeed very weak. Not to mention the condition of his body, even his internal strength was almost depleted. It was incomparable to the past. Chu Yuni had long known that the white-robed gentleman's body had been weak since childhood. Doctors didn't treat themselves, but he never expected the man's body to weaken so quickly. His father had at least lived past 30 years back then, but judging from his current situation, that might not be the case. If the Nether clan head insists, this junior can give it a try. But if this junior isn't careful and falls into the Duke of Qin's hands as well, I hope that you can save me. Chu Yuni's heart died at the white-robed gentleman's words. If this fellow fell into Long Fei Ye's hands as well, then things would be even more troublesome. Although the man was weak, his medical skills were astonishing. Moreover, he had earned the trust of both Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi at Pilfiend Pharmacy. If they kept him around for now, he'd definitely be useful in the future. Chu Yuni sighed softly. Old man naturally wouldn't let you take such a risk. We'll have to think long and hard about saving his life. I'm just afraid that Tianyin will suffer. As this junior understands, no one has ever been able to withstand the Duke of Qin's interrogation, the white-robed gentleman said. Chu Yuni didn't worry. Old man can still trust that child, Tianyin. He knows when to yield and when not to. He knows his limits and has a bottom line. Even if he dies, he won't reveal anything he shouldn't. In that case, as this junior sees it, there's no need for the Nether clan head to save him. If the Duke of Qin lets him live, he'll definitely come knocking on our doors. If he dies, he'll be sacrificed for the sake of Western Qin. That'll count as a glorious deed, the white-robed gentleman said seriously. In other words, he was simply leaving him to die while you watch him die. It's fine if you don't save him, but you want him to die as well? Would Chu Tianyin really die of anger if he heard those words? The white-robed gentleman spoke beautifully, leaving Chu Yuni speechless. He'd always emphasized Western Qin's righteousness and the family's mission. Although it was a pity that he couldn't get any help in saving Chu Tianyin, Chu Yuni didn't want to waste any more words. He'd finally found this fellow, so of course he had other matters to attend to. Let's think long and hard about this matter, Chu Yuni said as he stroked his beard. There's another matter that really needs your help. Please speak, the white-robed gentleman said politely. The heart hidden under the sickly body could calmly accept everything in the world. No matter how big the matter was, even if the sky collapsed, his heart would not have a ripple. In this world, there was probably no one else who could truly touch his heart besides the person he'd risked his life to protect. Chinga's child is already 4 months old. In another 3 months we can use drugs to induce premature birth. Before Chu Yuni could finish, the white-robed man cut him off. Nether clan head means to use medicine to give birth prematurely? The drugs have already been sold from Medicine City. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble you to take care of the 7-month-old baby, Chu Yuni smiled helplessly. The white-robed gentleman furrowed his brows. And if it's a girl? Don't worry about that. Tianyin's already found 10 or so pregnant women around the same time as Chinga. Old man refuses to believe that he can't give birth to a boy. Chu Yuni's words implied that he was going to use drugs to induce premature birth on all of the women. The white-robed gentleman shook his head. The medical academy forbids the use of such drugs. Medicine City might dare to sell them, but this junior doesn't dare to use them. Chu Yuni chuckled. When have you ever taken the medical academy's rules to heart? Nether clan head, there's no guarantee of success in inducing labor. If you're not careful, there's a chance that both the mother and child will die, the white-robed gentleman said seriously. With your skills, old man doesn't need to worry, Chu Yuni said with a cold sneer. It's rare for old man to find you. You're not going to ask the old man to find someone better, are you? This junior does have the skills to induce labor, but I'll never do it. Nether clan head, what crime has the 7-month-old baby committed? Why do you have to deprive it of its natural right to grow? Do you know how much suffering a premature baby will have to go through? Do you know how many illnesses it'll have in the future? The white-robed gentleman asked seriously. Chu Yuni finally lost his temper at being rejected again. Old man only knows that the baby has to be born as soon as possible. Otherwise there's no need for it at all. Old man will ask you one more time, will you help me or not? The white-robed gentleman rose to his feet and bowed with hands clasped in front. Forgive me for being unable to comply. You? Chu Yuni slapped the table and rose to his feet. Do you know the importance of that imperial throne in Western Liang? Long Fei Yi was about to arrive in Western Zhou. Western Zhou's emperor was already afraid of the Chu clan to begin with, but Long Fei Yi's interference would make it even harder for the Chu clan to stay in Western Zhou. Thus, the Chu clan had to seize Tianning's throne as soon as possible. Although Tianning had been split into 3 parts and Emperor Tianhui had retired to Western Liang, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The Chu clan needed all of Emperor Tianhui's military power, wealth, and territory. Right now, both the Chu clan and Western Zhou were Chu Qingga's backing. They were also Emperor Tianhui's support against the Tianan country and the south-central regions. But soon enough, Tianning would be the Chu clan's support against Western Zhou. There were no such things as eternal allies or enemies in the imperial court, much less eternal support. Only by taking all the support for one's own could one achieve eternity. Chu Yuni's ambitions were vast, and the Chu clan's plans were far in the future. But the white-robed gentleman didn't care for any of that. Even though this was his first time facing such an angry Nether clan head, he didn't panic or speak much. If there's nothing else, this junior will take his leave. So speaking, he turned to leave, but Chu Yuni wouldn't let him go so easily. Gu Beiyue, What are your motives for refusing old man's 2 requests? Gu Beiwei. That's right, the white-robed gentleman was none other than the former head of Tianning's Imperial Physician Courtyard, now Pilfine Pharmacy's resident physician, Gu Beiwei. After hiding in Tianning for so many years, only the Nether clan knew of his true origins and identity. Moreover, they rarely called him by his full name. Today was the first time they'd done so. It was clear to see how angry the Nether clan head was, but Gu Beiwei was as calm as ever as he opened the door to leave. Someone come stop him? The Nether clan head ordered, and a group of archers surrounded the small courtyard. These archers only had arrows and no bows, so they were driving arrow archers. Anyone would stop before such a force, but Gu Beiwei didn't panic as he kept walking forward. The driving arrow archers were the first to panic, unsure of how to stop him. The Nether clan head personally pulled out an arrow and shot it at him with his bare hands. The arrow barely missed Gu Beiwei by a hair's breadth as a warning, but Gu Beiwei remained unmoved. Does your Shadow clan want to break off relations with my Nether clan? Your grandfather's spirit in heaven won't rest in peace. Chu Yuni raged. Nether clan head's words are too serious. If my grandfather were still alive, he'd definitely refuse such cruel treatment. Gu Beiwei was about to leave when he added, Nether clan head, if this junior has any news about the perplexing butterfly illusion, I'll be the first to tell you. He was already in front of the driving arrow archers, who didn't dare to shoot without orders. All they could do was step aside. The Nether clan head coldly stared at him, furious. He'd lost all face but couldn't really kill Gu Beiwei. All he could do was allow him to leave. By the time General Chu arrived, Gu Beiwei had already left. Why don't we imprison him? What's the point? At the very least, he'll be a spy at Pilfine Pharmacy, Chu Yuni muttered. That brat's on good terms with Han Yunxi. He's even offended Emperor Tianhui time and time again to help Han Yunxi. As I see it, we should investigate Han Yunxi further. General Chu was cautious, but Chu Yuni said, we've already asked clearly. He's aiming for the perplexing butterfly illusion. Han Yunxi's poison skills are profound, so it won't be difficult for her to dispel the poison if she's really infected with it. General Chu nodded and mocked himself. I'm being overly suspicious. If he has such intentions, we can keep him around. How's the situation on Chinga's side? Chu Yuni asked next. With Chu Tianyin imprisoned, Chu Chinga's side was like a group of dragons without a leader. Which ants already arrived. As for the labor, why don't we find someone from Medical City? General Chu asked. Medical City? Chu Yuni's eyes flickered with a complicated look. After a while he said, Medical City? You'll need a sage doctor to be absolutely safe, right? Sage doctor. Then there are only 3 people left. Head Elder Ling Gai, Second Elder Li Shiyuan, and Third Elder Xin Jueming, General Chu replied. Chapter 567. Currently, there were only 3 people at the rank of Medical Sage, the top 3 of the Medical Academy's Council of Elders. Forget about the head elder, it was difficult to invite the second and third elders, especially when it came to inducing labor, which was forbidden by Medical City. But since General Chu had brought it up, it meant it was possible. Third Elder Shin showed up recently because of the dispute between Pilfine Pharmacy and Medicine City. How about? General Chu asked. Chu Yuni rejected the idea. This is a serious matter. We have to be 100% certain or else we'll lose everything. This didn't just affect the success of inducing labor, but the secrecy of the matter as well. If someone leaked the news, the Chu clan would be despised by the world. They decided to induce labor out of fear that the situation might change, but they'd rather hold out for 3 more months if they weren't 100% certain. There is one person we can trust. General Chu lowered his voice and said a name. Lady Lianxin. Everyone in Cloud Realm Continent knew about the events in Medicine City. Lady Lianxin and Han Yunxi's group had long been at odds with each other. The Mu clan had been suppressed to death in Medicine City, so it'd be difficult for them to rise again. If Lady Lianxin could ally with them, they'd be able to take revenge and have some support outside of the medical academy. She was an intelligent woman, so she wouldn't refuse. Although Lady Lianxin was only a godly doctor, with her ability, it was still possible to invite a medical sage elder. Moreover, she knew best which elder would be the safest. Chu Yuni rejoiced. There's no time to lose. You should go personally. Chinga has Witch Ant by her side, so you don't have to worry. Long Fei Yi hadn't even arrived in Western Zhou yet, but the Chu clan was already panicking. They were even planning to induce labor for Chu Chinga. What would happen if the Long Fei Yi really showed up? Currently, Chu Qingge had no idea about the labor. She was pregnant with Emperor Qinhui's child, but her heart was still pining for His Highness Duke of Qin. In the dead of night, Chu Qingge leaned against the windowsill and stared at the moon in deep thought. Witch Ant sat behind her, mixing medicine. The 15th of next month. There are still 20 days left, Chu Qingge muttered. You're not worried that he'll imprison your big brother? I thought you'd hate him instead? Witch Ant was displeased. Chu Qingge turned around and stared at Witch Ant for a while before she spoke with a cold smile. Shouldn't I be happy? If she wanted to hate someone, she should hate her father and brother the most. Witch Ant was going to scold her, but when she saw Chu Qingge's tears streaming down her cheeks, she couldn't bear to do so. After all, she was Chu Qingge's aunt and had raised the girl single-handedly. After a moment of silence, Witch Ant said faintly, if you want to hate someone, hate yourself for loving the wrong person. No. Chu Qingge suddenly grew agitated. That's right. Even if everything could be redone, I would still love him. I only hate Han Yunxi. If it weren't for Han Yunxi, I wouldn't have fallen to this state today. If it weren't for Han Yunxi, he might have taken a look at me. If it hadn't been for Han Yunxi, she wouldn't have played the zither at the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet and caught old thief Tianhui's eye. If it hadn't been for Han Yunxi, Long Feiyi wouldn't have rejected her immediately with her background, looks, martial arts skills and talents. If it hadn't been for old thief Tianhui, her father and brother would have pushed for her to be with Long Feiyi instead. Thus, all of this was Han Yunxi's fault. Witch Ant looked at her nearly insane niece and recalled Han Yunxi at the poison grounds. She couldn't help but shake her head. Qing'er, if you hate her, you might as well hate yourself. Chu Qingge was too caught up in her own grief to hear Witch Ant's words. Witch Ant poured the medicinal powder in her hands and handed it to her. Hurry and drink it, it's good for your body. If your body collapses, you'll have no way to fight against Han Yunxi. Chu Qingge didn't even look at it, much less drink it. If you want to fight against Han Yunxi, you'll have to nurse your body back to health. You still have a long road ahead of you. Witch Ant coaxed. This was indeed a nourishing medicine that Witch Ant had prepared herself to help Chu Qingge's body recover before she gave birth. Chu Qingge wasn't clear-headed yet, but Witch Ant knew that the Chu clan would cast her aside as soon as she was useless. Only then did Chu Qingge reluctantly drink the medicine, leaving Witch Ant feeling both heartache and helpless. Does Emperor Tianhui know about the Duke of Qin's visit to Western Zhou? Witch Ant asked. Those imperial princes have already asked to see him a few times, but they were all stopped. Even if they went in, Tianhui wouldn't be able to hear a thing. Chu Tianyin was useless in other areas, but he had Emperor Tianhui firmly under his thumb. Chu Qingge would leave a mark in the annals of femme fatale history. That's good. Witch Ant didn't want to scold Chu Qingge either. With her personally watching over Western Zhou, there shouldn't be any major problems. She figured it'd be better to leave Chu Qingge with some lingering hopes. She'd seen the Duke of Qin's elegant demeanor with her own eyes and experienced his methods. She knew very well that few women could forget a man like him. It wasn't just Western Zhou that was paying attention to Long Feiyi's visit, but Tianan City as well. Long Qianma couldn't sit still and went to General Mu's estate in person. What does the Duke of Qin mean by this? Zhen was going to invite him to Tianan ages ago, but you all tried to stop me. Now that he's gone to Western Zhou, the Chu clan should be proud of themselves. Mu Qingwu stood on one side without a word while General Mu respectfully offered him tea. Your Majesty, the Duke of Qin is going to Western Zhou, not Tianing. Please keep calm. What's the difference between him going to Western Zhou and Tianing? Long Qianma asked. Father, this matter. The Duke of Qin's actions are truly surprising. Mu Qingwu and Long Qianma stood on the same side. Emperor Kong Cheng allowed the Chu clan to come through the marriage alliance in the first place. Wasn't he afraid that the Chu clan would rise to power? Once Tianing falls into Western Zhou's hands, we'll become the target of a multitude of arrows if we befriend the Duke of Qin. Long Qianma said angrily. His considerations weren't wrong. The Chu clan controlled half of Western Zhou's military power, but Emperor Kong Cheng still allowed the Chu clan's daughter to marry into Tianing. This meant that the emperor had enough power to suppress the Chu clan. Thus, the Chu clan would only end up in Western Zhou's hands. Once Western Zhou took control of the 10 northwestern prefectures and befriended the Duke of Qin, Tianan would be surrounded by enemies from 3 sides. Long Qianma hadn't even stabilized the foundations of his new kingdom yet. How could he withstand such a blow? Naturally he was anxious. However, General Mu was in no rush. Your Majesty, please keep calm. There's no rush to discuss this matter after the Duke of Qin leaves. As this old subject sees it, The Duke of Qin must have a reason for his sudden visit. Please, Your Majesty, listen to this old subject one more time. Long Qianma didn't understand. General Mu had always been rash and impulsive. His whipping of Han Yunshi was the best example, but when it came to matters of state he was calmer than anyone else. Could it be that he'd been acting all along? Of course, Long Qianma wouldn't voice his suspicions. He still trusted General Mu for now. After all, the Mu clan was the only thing he could rely on. General Mu's calmness had always been the right thing to do when it came to important matters. But this time Long Qianma couldn't keep his cool. He was about to speak when Mu Qingwu spoke up first. This soldier just remembered something. When the Duke of Qin refused Western Zhou's marriage alliance, Tianhui had to pay a hefty price to turn the matter into a small one. With Emperor Kangcheng's temper, it's unlikely that he'd invite the Duke of Qin of his own accord. And with the Duke of Qin's temper, even if he did go on an official visit, it might not necessarily be to make friends, right? Actually, Mu Qingwu was thinking of Han Yunshi as he spoke, while Long Qianma was thinking of her as well. It had been a long time since he'd seen her. Chu Qingge's words successfully calmed Long Qianma's restless heart. General Mu watched from the sidelines, clearly dissatisfied, but he could do nothing about it. After exchanging a few words, he changed the subject. Your Majesty, you're not young anymore. You should think about having children. Long Qianma hadn't taken a single concubine since he'd founded the country. He only had one woman, Mu Luiyue. With Mu Luiyue as empress, the Mad Empress Li naturally became the Empress Dowager, while Empress Dowager Li became the Grand Empress Dowager. Long Qianma was a filial son who obeyed the Mad Empress Dowager's every whim. Moreover, the Mad Empress Dowager especially liked Mu Luiyue and wanted Mu Luiyue to serve her. How could a madwoman be so easy to serve? Mu Luiyue's 3 meals a day were filled with grievances. Her father and older brother urged her to have children as well, but she didn't dare tell them. Long Qianma hadn't even touched her yet. Zhen will think it over, Long Qianma said coldly. He wasn't in the mood to stay any longer and left soon enough. The situation in Cloud Realm continent could be considered stable, but the Duke of Qin's actions could easily cause panic among the various powers. Even Northern Li's Emperor Ruiwu was paying close attention to the situation. But Emperor Ruiwu didn't seek out the Ministry of War, but Jun Yixie's master, by Qin Yan. As the head of Cloud Realm continent's strongest military force, Emperor Ruiwu was always clad in armor even when he wasn't on the battlefield. He was close to 50 years old, but he didn't seem to have aged at all. Instead, he looked valiant and domineering, like a tiger full of vigor. His sharp eyes were like a heavenly general. Dressed in a simple gray robe, Bai Qingyan seemed like a wild crane in front of him. However, this leisurely aura far suppressed Emperor Ruiwu's aura. Behind this leisurely aura was a hidden and frightening power. Tianning's Duke of Qin is in big trouble. Emperor Ruiwu had already criticized Long Feiyi like this more than once. Western Zhou and Tianning had been working together to stop Northern Li's cavalry from heading south for years. Now that Tianning's northern regions were divided into Tianning and Tiannan, their internal conflicts were complicated. Their relations with Western Zhou were complicated as well. Emperor Ruiwu was waiting for a chance to send his troops south. With such an advantageous situation, he couldn't allow Long Feiyi to cause trouble. Just let him be. A man's calamity is no match for a woman's calamity. Your Majesty, just wait for a good show, Bai Qingyan smiled. Emperor Ruiwu wasn't a brat like Long Qianma. He laughed out loud. A woman's calamity? Interesting. Very interesting. Zhen will wait. As for what Bai Qingyan meant by a woman's calamity, only the two of them knew. When Jun Yixie entered the room, the two of them tacitly stopped talking. Everyone was waiting to see Long Feiyi and Han Yunshi head to Western Zhou. Currently, Han Yunshi's group was indeed on the road. They could have taken the main road, but Tang Li's group had taken a detour instead. After Aunt Ru and Tang Zijin were fooled by Tang Li's fake tracks, they finally began to suspect Long Feiyi. Long Feiyi's side was the most dangerous place, so they never expected Tang Li to follow Long Feiyi. But even though they knew Long Feiyi and Han Yunshi were on their way to Western Zhou, they still couldn't find them. Instead, it was Tang Li's fiancé's faction that found them. They didn't want to cause any trouble on this trip to Western Zhou, so they could only hide. Hey, what's your fiancé's background? Han Yunshi asked curiously. Chapter 568. What was the background of Tang Li's fiancé? Tang Li chuckled. I don't know. Han Yunshi thought he was joking and said, tell me secretly. I won't betray you. Tang Li continued to chuckle. I really don't know. If you do, don't tell me either. I don't want to know. That woman was someone his father had chosen, not him. He'd rather hide from place to place for the rest of his life than marry her. Han Yunxi was currently riding on the same horse as Long Fei Yi, nestled in Long Fei Ye's arms. She looked up at Long Fei Yi suspiciously. You know, right? Long Fei Ye's reply made Han Yunxi even more speechless. Your lordship isn't interested? Tang Li had been running away from his marriage for over a year, while Long Fei Yi had helped him for over a year. Even now he still didn't know who the woman was? In the end, Han Yunxi chuckled as well. Those who chased after us were all highly skilled in martial arts. Their backgrounds must be significant. Speaking of this, Tang Li was still very excited. Back then they found over 50 experts to surround this young master. If this young master hadn't been quick-witted enough to bring along the pear blossom rain needles, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Could they be from the City of Assassins? Or the City of Daughters? Han Yunxi asked curiously. Or perhaps they're from a large financial group. As long as they have the silver, they can hire an entire city of assassins. Tang Li didn't have any feelings for his fiancée, but he didn't reject the topic. There are only a few financial groups under the heavens. Han Yunxi suddenly grew alarmed. They can't be from Cloud Realm Trade Consortium, right? This was the first time Tang Li had seriously considered his fiancée's identity. He thought for a while before replying, that's possible. If they really are from Cloud Realm Trade Consortium, then you should hurry back and marry them. That way you can find out more about the inner workings of the consortium. I heard that the executive president, Ouyang Ningjing, is still wasting time with the elders in Medicine City. Han Yunxi joked. If it's Ouyang Ningjing, I can consider it. Tang Li was joking too. He'd heard Chu Shifeng talk about Medicine City before. That Ouyang Ningjing was even harder to deal with than Ouyang Ningnua. Despite her young age, she was a strong woman. Han Yunxi glanced at him in disdain. She might not want to marry you. Han Yunxi and Tang Li chatted and bickered along the way. Long Fei Yi was not interested in the topics they were discussing, but he did not interfere. Of course, the premise of not interfering was that Han Yunxi was facing Tang Li and not other men. The cold winter in the west was especially bleak. After a few days they finally entered the borders of Western Zhou. Western Zhou's Emperor Kong Cheng hadn't forgotten how the Duke of Qin had humiliated Western Zhou by refusing Princess Yao's marriage alliance. But as the ruler of a nation, he couldn't be so stubborn as to make an enemy out of the Duke of Qin over a single matter and refuse all opportunities for cooperation. After all, the Duke of Qin had gained the most from the internal strife between Tianhui and his son. His every move would affect the current state of affairs in the various countries. Emperor Kong Cheng couldn't figure out the Duke of Qin's intentions for this sudden visit, but he maintained an open attitude and attached great importance to the matter. He'd long sent someone to contact Chu Shifeng to make arrangements to receive him. His original plan was to send someone to receive the Duke of Qin as soon as he entered Western Zhou's borders, but Chu Shifeng refused. He didn't even know the Duke of Qin's whereabouts, so he could only wait for news of his arrival. Who would have thought that another piece of news would arrive first, and it was a piece of shocking news about Great Qin's nether race. No one knew where it came from, but within a few days all of Cloud Realm continent was talking about it. The driving arrow arts of the Great Qin's nether clan had reappeared in Cloud Realm continent. After morning court, Emperor Kong Cheng discussed the news with a few officials in his study. The nether clan's driving arrow arts? Everything's been going well, so why's there a rumor like that? Your Majesty, there's no smoke without fire. I'm afraid someone really did see the driving arrow arts. It said that they shot arrows with their bare hands. I wonder how they did it? Your Majesty, the Great Qin's 7 noble families have been missing for years. As this old official sees it, this is only the beginning. 2 imperial clans have already been destroyed. No matter how capable the 7 noble families are, what can they do? Cloud Realm continent's already changed, so officially shouldn't worry too much. The 7 noble families have deep roots and an abundance of talents. If they're allowed to grow stronger and regain their former glory, the consequences will be unthinkable. As this old official sees it, Cloud Realm continent's 4 countries and 4 cities, the Kenzo Tang clan, should all work together to destroy the 7 noble families in a single spark. That way they won't be able to set the prairie ablaze in the future. This official doesn't dare to agree. As this official sees it, the Great Qin Empire has already turned to dust. If there's enough sincerity, the 7 noble families will choose another master to serve. If they can gain the support of the 7 noble families, they'll definitely regain their former glory and glory. Your Majesty, please be clear and make the first move. Don't let the 7 noble families fall into other people's hands. The ministers were arguing fiercely, but General Chu was the only one who didn't say a word. Emperor Kongqing had noticed this long ago. General Chu, what do you think of this matter? General Chu was feeling guilty, depressed, and stifled. In short, he was about to explode. He'd been waiting for Long Fei Yi to use Chu Tianyin as a hostage to negotiate terms with the Chu clan, but there was no news from the Long Fei Yi even after so long. It was almost the 15th day when something like this suddenly happened, catching the Chu clan completely off guard. What was Long Fei Yi trying to do by making the driving arrow arts known to the world? General Chu couldn't help but be cautious when faced with Emperor Kongqing's question. Who knew if Long Fei Yi had secretly revealed anything to the emperor? Reporting to your Majesty, this matter is still a rumor, so this general isn't in a position to comment. If it's true, what do you think? Emperor Kongqing pressed. If it's true, then this general agrees with Lord Chen's words. The great Qin Empire has already turned to dust. If the 7 noble families want to enter the world again, they'll definitely choose another master to serve. As soon as General Chu replied, Lord Li added, leaving aside the other 6 clans, isn't the Nether clan a traitor? They were the ones who killed the last prince of Western Qin's imperial clan. We can't make plans with such ambitious wolves. News of the Nether clan killing the last prince of Western Qin was one of the most widely spread stories in the history of the Great Qin Empire. General Chu's eyes flashed with anger, but he could only keep it to himself. Resentful, he didn't speak, but Lord Qin soon began arguing with Lord Li again. General Chu waited for Emperor Kongqing to speak up, but the man didn't say a word from start to finish. This only made General Chu even more uneasy. After returning, General Chu went to find clan head Chu Yuni as soon as he could. Inside the imperial study, he was so angry that he wanted to beat up Chu Tianyin and Witch Ant. It was one thing for the 2 of them to kill Long Fei Yi and the rest in the Poison Sect's underground palace, but why reveal the driving arrow arts? How are they supposed to clean up the mess now? Just what is the Duke of Qin planning with his actions? Chu Yuni had been in a terrible fix after hearing the news last night. Seeing General Chu so irritable only made him vexed. He waved a hand to indicate for the man to sit down. No matter what his intentions are, we have to make ample preparations. Western Qin is our only path of retreat. Has there been any news from Medical City? He asked seriously. General Chu exhaled at the mention of this. I received news as soon as I returned that Lady Lianxin agreed. We'll discuss the details in 5 days, General Chu replied. Did they say which elders they're planning to invite? Chu Yuni asked urgently. General Chu could only shake his head. In any case, it's just those 3. It'd be great if it was head elder Ling, but the chances are slim. No matter what, we have to hurry. As for the Duke of Qin, if he won't talk to us, why don't we talk to him instead? We can at least get to the bottom of his situation? General Chu said anxiously. Chu Yuni thought for a long time before coming to a decision. It's almost the 15th. We'll have to wait until he arrives to talk. If he dares to reveal the truth, my Nether clan won't let the matter rest even if we have to fight to the death. A few days later, Long Fei Ye's group finally arrived at Western Zhou's capital, White City. Emperor Kongqing had sent Crown Prince Duanmu Bei out of the city to greet them. This was second only to the emperor himself, a testament to the Duke of Qin's high status and the importance Emperor Kongqing attached to this visit. At the very least, he'd expressed his intentions. Since Long Fei Yi had come out of his own accord, he'd forget about the grudges of the political marriage alliance. Duanmu Bei didn't have Emperor Kongqing's breadth of mind or foresight. His heart ached for his little sister and he was extremely unhappy, but he couldn't defy the emperor's orders. All he could do was grit his teeth and agree. Originally, he wanted to find Chu Tianyin to leave the city with him, but was told that the man wasn't in White City. Actually, he could have brought along a group of officials as well, but that would be giving Long Fei Yi too much face. He refused. Tang Li didn't show up, so Duanmu Bei only saw Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. After exchanging a few pleasantries, they switched carriages and didn't speak for the rest of the journey. Duanmu Bei escorted them to the Chamberlain of Dependencies and left them in the care of official Lin before leaving. But when he saw Long Fei Yi taking care of Han Yunxi even while drinking tea and handing her a cup, Duanmu Bei couldn't help but turn back and ask, Duke of Qin, I heard from Yao Yao that your master misses you very much. You haven't returned to Celestial Mountain for many years, right? Han Yunxi could tell that Duanmu Bei was speaking on behalf of Duanmu Yao, but she pretended not to hear him and silently sipped her tea. As for Long Fei Yi, it wasn't clear whether he heard him or not. In any case, he ignored Duanmu Bei. Duanmu Bei wasn't discouraged. He purposely sat down in front of him and asked, "Duke of Qin, when are you going up Celestial Mountain to summon this crown prince? This crown prince hasn't seen Yao Yao in a long time." These words made it seem like Long Fei Yi was going up the mountain to see Duanmu Yao. It was impossible for Han Yunxi to not feel any ripples in her heart. The only time she truly fought with Duanmu Yao was during the political marriage last time. She also looked forward to the day when Celestial Mountain would seriously deal with Duanmu Yao. Last time she swindled Long Fei Yi away and caused Long Fei Yi to be seriously injured. She definitely had to settle the score. Seeing that the Duke of Qin was still ignoring him and seeing that Han Yunxi wasn't moved, Duanmu Bei became even more aggressive and said, "Duke of Qin, time really flies. Back when Yao Yao first met you, she was still a little girl. At that time she was always running after you. Back then I thought you left the position of Qin Wangfei for Yao Yao. In the end, childhood sweethearts can't compete with the word marriage." Duanmu Bei sighed. Han Yunxi finally couldn't sit still anymore. It wasn't that she couldn't withstand provocation, but that Duanmu Bei's words were really too much. He wanted to sourly say that Duanmu Yao could do whatever she wanted, and she would only treat it as a joke. However, mentioning the position of Qin Wangfei in front of her was clearly slapping her in the face. If this wasn't bullying, then what was? How many people were paying attention to their every word and action when they were visiting Western Zhou? If news of her being humiliated by Duanmu Bei spread, how could she continue to be Qin Wangfei? Han Yunxi was about to speak, but who knew that Long Fei Yi would actually press down on her hand and stop her? What did he mean? Chapter 569. Han Yunxi was furious. She wanted to teach Duanmu Bei a lesson, but Long Fei Yi stopped her. She thought that Long Fei Yi would personally teach Duanmu Bei a lesson, but who knew that Long Fei Yi would still remain silent? Everyone could tell that he was ignoring Duanmu Bei, but now that Duanmu Bei was bullying Han Yunxi, what would he do if he didn't say anything? Should he endure it? Although he was a foreign guest and couldn't act casually, this kind of tolerance was unlike Long Fei Yi's style. Could it be because of Duanmu Yao? There were a few precedents, so it was no wonder that Han Yunxi thought so much. Moreover, this time, no matter what the reason was, Long Fei Yi didn't have a need to tolerate Duanmu Bei. Duanmu Bei was also waiting for Long Fei Yi to retaliate. Seeing that he didn't speak, he became even more aggressive. "Duke of Qin, the last time you came to White City was about 7 to 8 years ago, right? When you sent Yao Yao back, actually, my imperial father had already taken a fancy to you. He never thought that a mere daughter of the Han family would become the official consort." Duanmu Bei muttered to himself, "It's a pity that Yao Yao was deceived by Jun Yixie and ended up in a situation where she couldn't return home. Otherwise, the one to receive you today would definitely be her. Who knows, maybe Duke of Qin could even reunite with your marriage on this trip." Duanmu Bei was a man, but his mouth was so cheap, even more so than his sister's. Han Yunxi's face was gloomy and her hands were clenched. Long Fei Yi could clearly feel her anger, but he only held her hands tightly and didn't say anything. Han Yunxi didn't plan to refute anymore. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything, so it was meaningless for her to refute Duanmu Bei. She lowered her head and felt sad. Seeing this, Duanmu Bei became even more smug. He spoke with all his might and didn't stop. In a short while he had called Duke of Qin more than 10 times. The room was silent. Even the Chamberlain of Dependencies was very quiet. He was the only one in a one-man show. Gradually Han Yunxi slowly raised her head. In the beginning she was sad and gloomy, but Long Fei Yi didn't respond even after Duanmu Bei kept calling him Duke of Qin for so long. She actually felt like she was listening to a joke. Long Fei Yi was sitting with his legs crossed like the owner of the house. His domineering aura was natural. He held Han Yunxi's hand with one hand and raised a cup with the other. He was leisurely sipping tea. Duanmu Bei was standing right in front of him. He was tall and strong, but he didn't give off the feeling of being high and mighty. Instead, he was like an iron man with a hot face and a cold butt. Duanmu Bei also felt uncomfortable. He unconsciously rubbed his hands together, not knowing where to put them. In order to hide his awkwardness and nervousness, he finally clenched his fists and let them hang by his side. He coughed lightly and continued his own words. "Duke of Qin, this crown prince didn't say anything wrong, right?" However, Long Fei Yi still ignored him. The room was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Duanmu Bei was so embarrassed that he couldn't advance or retreat. He subconsciously looked at Official Lin of the Office of Dependencies, only to see Official Lin also looking at him with a blank expression. However, when Official Lin saw Duanmu Bei looking over, he hurriedly looked away. This made Duanmu Bei even more embarrassed. He was certain that Official Lin was laughing at him. When had the dignified crown prince ever been ignored like this, especially in front of an official? He finally flew into a rage out of humiliation. Long Fei Yi, what's the meaning of this? Why are you still putting on airs in my Western Zhou? As soon as he said this, Long Fei Yi slowly let go of Han Yunxi's hand. Then, he suddenly slammed his hand down on the tea table, causing the tea set on the table to clatter loudly. He said coldly, "Official Lin, please inform Emperor Kong Cheng that this prince will be leaving with his heirs." As soon as he finished speaking, he took Han Yunxi's hand and left. Han Yunxi finally understood that Long Fei Yi was deliberately provoking Duanmu Bei. This idiot was so stupid. No wonder he was so easily fooled by Chu Tianyin. After all, the Chu clan's smooth career in Western Zhou for the past 10 years was more or less due to their connections with this crown prince. When Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's figures disappeared through the doorway, the official of the Office of Dependencies suddenly regained his senses. Frightened, he hurriedly chased after them. "Your Highness Duke of Qin, it's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please wait. Please wait. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please listen to the Crown Prince's explanation." The Crown Prince didn't mean it that way. The Crown Prince was just, as Duanmu Bei listened to the gradually fading voices, he suddenly shivered and completely sobered up. Heavens, what did he just say? Previously he had a grudge with Long Fei Yi so he could say whatever he wanted. But now that the Long Fei Yi had taken the initiative to visit, Imperial Father was also very much looking forward to it. In order to receive the Long Fei Yi, Imperial Father had been in closed-door discussions with the ministers these past few days. No matter how unwilling he was, no matter how much his heart ached for Yao Yao, he had to endure it. Moreover, there were many ways to secretly make things difficult for him in his territory. No matter what, he couldn't openly fall out with the Crown Prince. Duanmu Bei wanted nothing more than to slap himself. How was he supposed to explain this to Imperial Father? It was over. Official Lin quickly returned, his face pale with fright. He hurriedly said, "Your Highness Crown Prince, please listen to this official's advice. Hurry and apologize, hurry and go. If the Duke of Qin really leaves, neither of us will be able to explain it to His Majesty." Duanmu Bei was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. "Your Highness Crown Prince, hurry and go. If the Duke of Qin leaves the city, it'll really be too late." Duanmu Bei was silent for a long time before he finally said in a low voice, "Official Lin, do you think this Crown Prince will be able to get her back?" With Long Fei Yi's temperament, it was impossible for him to turn a big problem into a small one. Official Lin couldn't be bothered with Duanmu Bei any longer and promptly made his way into the palace. At this time, Emperor Kong Cheng was still in the imperial study discussing the matter with his ministers. By the time Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi arrived, it was already afternoon. According to etiquette, the Chamberlain of Dependencies had arranged for them to rest for the night and meet with Emperor Kong Cheng tomorrow morning. Emperor Kong Cheng had already instructed that a banquet would be held for the Duke of Qin tomorrow night. As soon as Official Lin reported the matter, the entire imperial study instantly fell silent. After a long silence, Emperor Kong Cheng flew into a rage and swept everything off his desk. He was so angry that he couldn't even speak. He directly rebuked, "Unfilial son. Unfilial son." If Western Zhou had enough strength and the Western Zhou Crown Prince had enough skills, even if Long Fei took the initiative to visit him, he could still speak rudely. But Western Zhou didn't have that kind of confidence. Moreover, they were facing the Duke of Qin, Long Fei Yi, whom everyone in Cloud Realm continent feared. Leaving aside the losses and costs they would have to pay, once news of this spread, Duanmu Bei's stupidity would be regarded as the stupidity of Western Zhou's imperial clan. Zhen's going to cripple him. Cripple him. Emperor Kong Cheng raged. All of the ministers were anxious and nervous as well. General Chu hung his head with a complicated look in his eyes. But soon enough someone else spoke up. "Your Majesty, hurry and think of a way to salvage the situation before the Duke of Qin leaves the city. This old official boldly suggests that you personally try to persuade him to stay." Immediately someone retorted, You can't. You absolutely can't. If your Majesty tries to persuade him to stay, then Western Zhou will lose even more face once news spreads. Right now the crown prince needs to go personally. Long Fei Yi hadn't proclaimed himself emperor in the south-central regions, nor had he recognized the former Tianning and Tianan countries. He'd always used his status as Tianning's Qinhuang. As the sovereign of Western Zhou, it would be inappropriate for Emperor Kongqing to personally try to persuade a Qinhuang to stay. If the crown prince goes, I'm afraid the Duke of Qin will be even angrier. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, you won't lose face if you go. Instead, it'll show that you're a magnanimous man. In this old official's humble opinion, Your Majesty should first depose the crown prince, then chase after the Duke of Qin to show your sincerity. The crown prince's actions first look down on the sovereign's might, second go against his Majesty's will, third go against propriety, fourth go against the nation's culture, and fifth go for disaster. He should be deposed. Audacious. Is the crown prince's removal something you can casually discuss? Your Majesty, His Highness Crown Prince executed Lord Chen's disciple on the spot for kidnapping a common woman. He's exaggerating and using his position to avenge private wrongs. Please punish him severely, Your Majesty. The Eastern Palace faction immediately retorted. Such was the power struggle between factions. No good opportunity would be missed. Soon the two factions began to quarrel. Emperor Kongqing's expression grew uglier and uglier as he remained silent. General Chu, who was also a member of the Crown Prince's faction, didn't miss the opportunity to interject. Your Majesty, no matter how reckless His Highness Crown Prince is, he wouldn't be so rude. In this general's opinion, His Highness Crown Prince must have been provoked by the Duke of Qin. Normally, Emperor Kongqing would have listened to these words. Although the Crown Prince was of the same age as the Duke of Qin, his intelligence and shrewdness were far inferior. It was pardonable that he'd been tricked. However, Emperor Kongqing was currently in a fit of anger. He was already sick and tired of the quarrel between the two factions. When he heard these words, he became even angrier. Provoked? Why would the Duke of Qin provoke him? Are you planning to tell us that the Duke of Qin came to Y-Town to provoke that unfilial son? General Chu had nothing to say in response and resentfully shut his mouth. Emperor Kongqing was furious, but he hadn't completely lost his reason. Without further delay, he stood up and said, "Someone prepare the carriage. We want to leave the palace incognito." Leaving the palace incognito and chasing after the Duke of Qin in private was a compromise and the best method. Firstly, it wouldn't be too humiliating, and secondly, it would show his sincerity. None of the officials present dared to object. As soon as Emperor Kongqing left, Great General Chu hurriedly ordered official Lin, quickly reserve Taoren restaurant and have the Crown Prince accompany His Majesty there. Tell His Majesty that he's invited the Duke of Qin to Taoren restaurant for tea as an apology. Duanmu Bay was a big tree in the Chu clan. This tree absolutely couldn't fall. Long Fei Yi had only just arrived in Western Zhou, but his words had already shaken the Western Zhou court. Regardless of how this matter would end, if word of it got out, no country would dare to slight the Duke of Qin and his wife in the future. At this moment, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi were sitting in a carriage heading out of the city. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything, but Han Yunshi already knew why he didn't want her to argue with Duanmu Bei. This guy was deliberately provoking Duanmu Bei. If a big tree like Duanmu Bei falls, the Chu clan will hate you even more, Han Yunshi said with a smile. Long Fei Yi had come here to deal with the Chu clan. It could be said that he'd given the Chu clan a great show of strength today. Long Fei Yi looked at her seriously and asked, "Are you happy now?" Han Yunshi was stunned. For a moment she didn't understand what he meant. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi continued, "When Emperor Kongqing arrives, I'll have him apologize to you." This. Han Yunshi was stunned, but she also understood. Long Fei Yi had schemed against Duanmu Bei to force Emperor Kongqing to apologize. This guy. Chapter 570. Han Yunshi didn't know what to say to Long Fei Yi. It didn't seem likely that the ruler of a nation would apologize to a woman. But it had happened, and it had happened to her. Emperor Kongqing definitely wouldn't let them leave just like that, nor would he be stupid enough to apologize to Duanmu Bei. Thus, the emperor would personally urge them to stay, and the only way to do so would be to apologize. Otherwise, how could he persuade them to stay? Happy? Han Yunshi had been happy for a long time. Now that she understood that Long Fei Yi was enduring for Duanmu Bei's sake and not for Duanmu Yao's sake, she wasn't sad anymore. Her heart wasn't that weak. If she could ruthlessly trap Duanmu Bei and cut down the Chu clan's pillar of support, then endure his eloquence, then it was worth it. Of course, she had to ask about Duanmu Yao before Emperor Kong Qing caught up to them. It was fine if she didn't know before, but now that she did, she felt uncomfortable hiding it. In this aspect, she admitted that she was a petty person who haggled over every detail. Long Fei Yi, did you come to White City 7 or 8 years ago? Han Yunshi didn't ask directly, but the insensitive Long Fei had learned his lesson after eating a special sour pastry. He knew what Han Yunshi wanted to ask as soon as he heard her words. Western Zhou is the only way to leave Celestial Mountain and return to Tianning. At that time I came with Duanmu Yao to pay my respects to Emperor Kong Qing. I didn't make a special trip to send her back, Long Fei Yi explained clearly. However, women wouldn't be satisfied no matter how clearly he explained. Either she didn't ask or she'd ask a lot of questions. So Emperor Kong Qing took a fancy to you back then? He wanted you to be his son-in-law? Han Yunshi teased. Long Fei Yi's unchanging iceberg face was clearly a bit embarrassed. This was the first time someone had dared to ask him such a question so directly. He looked out the window and made a low sound of agreement. Why didn't you agree back then? The power behind Duanmu Yao's back is something that my Han family can never catch up to. Han Yunshi said sourly on purpose. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi glanced over and asked, how do you know that this prince didn't agree? Han Yunshi froze. Long Fei Yi sized her up with a sidelong glance. After a while he said, you're the poison sex daughter of the first wife. This prince won't lose out by marrying you. Han Yunshi was annoyed. You? Long Fei Yi didn't explain. He just stared at her. Han Yunshi wanted to tease Long Fei Yi, but he teased her instead. Han Yunshi couldn't continue this topic, so she changed the subject. How long did Duanmu Yao stay with you at Celestial Mountain? How did you two become childhood sweethearts? This time Long Fei Yi answered seriously. That year, Master announced that he was accepting disciples. In order to win over Tianshan Mountain's factions, each country's royal family sent their princes and princesses to participate in the competition. Out of 100 or so children, Master chose me and her. After we joined Master's sect, we stayed on Tianshan Mountain for half a year before returning to our respective countries. We only went there once in a while to learn the way of the sword. We didn't run into each other often and only ran into each other once or twice by coincidence. The truth was that Duanmu Yao had clung to Long Fei Yi the first time she saw him. After returning to her country, she tried every means possible to find out when Long Fei Yi would return to Tianshan Mountain. She created a series of coincidences so that she could cultivate together with Long Fei Yi. After those two coincidences, Long Fei Yi deliberately avoided her. Unless he had no other choice, he would wait until Duanmu Yao returned from her cultivation every year before going up Tianshan Mountain. So after running into each other once or twice by coincidence, the two of you cultivated together? She chased after you all day long? Han Yunshi was jealous again. Women were so narrow-minded. When a man fell in love with a woman, he couldn't wait for her to be the only woman in his life. He couldn't wait for her to be the only woman in his memories. Before Long Fei Yi could answer, Han Yunshi said, Long Fei Yi, tell me, why didn't I meet you earlier? Long Fei Yi looked at her and unconsciously brushed her bangs. I wanted to too. If he had met this woman earlier, would he have been less lonely these past 20 years? The two of them looked at each other. There was no need for further explanation. Long Fei Yi slowly inched closer. Just as he was about to kiss her lips, Han Yunshi snapped out of her daze and pushed him away. I'm not done yet. Long Fei Yi smiled bitterly. Even he hadn't imagined that he would indulge a woman like this one day. Your master likes Duanmu Yao a lot, right? Han Yunshi's question hit the nail on the head. Long Fei Yi nodded, then quickly added, very? Then why did he only let you protect her until she turned 18? Why not just protect her for the rest of her life? Han Yunshi asked gloomily. A complicated look flitted across Long Fei Yi's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. He said, when we go to Celestial Mountain next year, perhaps you can ask him. Han Yunshi rolled her eyes at him. That answer was as good as not answering at all. Does your master know that she likes you? Han Yunshi asked again. Long Fei Yi felt uncomfortable again. He pulled Han Yunshi into his arms and said domineeringly, just remember that this prince doesn't like her. Why care about others? So your master knows about it? Han Yunshi raised her head to look at him. Long Fei Yi pressed her head back into his arms. This prince only likes you. Han Yunshi slapped his hand away and asked again, if your master knows that she likes you, does that mean, however, before she could finish, Long Fei Yi's lips pressed against hers, domineeringly devouring all of her words. Yeah. Han Yunxi kissed him a few times but she couldn't move him at all. She had to admit that this was the first time she was being bullied by Long Fei Yi that she was able to maintain her sanity. She couldn't push him away so she gritted her teeth and refused. However, Long Fei Yi was very naughty, his large hands restlessly covering her body. Although this wasn't the first time, Han Yunxi was still shocked. While she was caught off guard, Long Fei Yi easily pried inside and attacked her. Soon Long Fei Yi's lips and hands bullied her so much that she couldn't think straight. Her entire body went limp in his arms. If Emperor Kong Cheng's carriage hadn't arrived, Long Fei Yi probably wouldn't have been able to think straight either. A plain-clothed guard rode a horse to stop their carriage. Soon after, Emperor Kong Cheng's carriage approached. The guard whispered by the window, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, my master would like to invite you to Taoran Inn for a cup of tea. Would you do me the honor?" Long Fei Yi knew what was going on. He let go of Han Yunxi and casually wiped the corner of his mouth. Han Yunxi lay on his lap and looked up at him. She suddenly discovered that the way he wiped the corner of his mouth was especially naughty. However, she also liked it. Her eyes darted around as she snickered wickedly. As soon as Long Fei lifted a corner of the curtains, she tugged at his robe belt. Long Fei Yi, who was always calm and composed, suddenly stiffened. It was so obvious that Han Yunxi noticed it. At this time, the curtain of the carriage next to them also lifted, revealing a dignified face. It was none other than Emperor Kong Cheng, who had just left the palace in plain clothes. He looked at Long Fei Yi and nodded at Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi still had some self-control. He ignored Han Yunxi and expressionlessly nodded back at Emperor Kong Cheng. Unexpectedly, Han Yunxi reached under his clothes and easily passed through his undershirt. Her jade-like fingers gently stroked his firm chest muscles. Long Fei Yi's entire body quivered, but he forced himself to hold on. Seeing this, Han Yunxi's playfulness grew. Her small hand gently stroked his sensitive spot, whether intentionally or not. Long Fei Yi finally couldn't hold on any longer. He immediately lowered the curtain, leaving the guards and Emperor Kong Cheng outside at a loss. What did the Duke of Qin mean by this? Was he going to Taoran Inn or not? If he wasn't going, why did he show up and greet them? If he was going, why did he lower the curtain without saying a word? They really couldn't figure it out. If they knew that the Duke of Qin was being teased by a woman, and in such a brazen manner at that, they'd probably be shocked for 3 days and 3 nights. Inside the carriage, Long Fei Yi had Han Yunxi under his body and was on the verge of taking her on the spot. He leaned close to her ear and warned in a low voice, "If you keep being naughty, this prince won't be polite." He was so close that Han Yunxi could clearly feel the heat beneath his body. She didn't think she'd be nervous, but now she was scared to death. Her body was stretched taut and she didn't dare to move. After all, they were in a carriage. "Outside. The people outside are still waiting," she reminded him timidly. "You know that as well?" Long Fei Yi asked coldly. "I don't dare anymore." Han Yunxi closed her eyes. His gaze was so terrifying that it looked like he wanted to eat her alive. Long Fei Yi exhaled heavily before sitting up again. He lifted the curtain again and saw that his carriage hadn't left yet, so they were all waiting outside. "Your Highness Duke of Qin, shall we go?" the guard said hastily. "Lead the way," Long Fei Yi said coldly, his face cold as well. He quickly lowered the curtain again. The guard was even more baffled. This was his first time seeing Tianning's Duke of Qin, and he'd heard that he was a cold-faced Yama. Now that he'd seen him in person, he really was cold and unfeeling. But besides that, there seemed to be something else. The guard couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt like he'd disturbed the Duke of Qin's business and made him unhappy. Of course, he didn't dare tell Emperor Kong Cheng. Emperor Kong Cheng didn't think too much about it either. The Duke of Qin agreeing to go to Taoran restaurant was within his expectations, but he wasn't sure what would happen once they got there. Currently, Duanmu Bey was sitting in Emperor Kong Cheng's carriage as well. His head was bowed and he didn't even dare to fart. Fortunately, General Chu had reminded him in time to book the entire Taoran restaurant and ask for Imperial Father's forgiveness. Otherwise, the consequences would be unthinkable. Although Imperial Father hadn't said anything, the fact that he'd invited the Duke of Qin to Taoran restaurant meant that Duanmu Bey still had a chance. Duanmu Bey only hoped that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi wouldn't go too far at Taoran restaurant. By now, Han Yunxi had already sat up, her head bowed like a child who'd made a mistake. She sat far away from Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi took another deep breath. How could his lust be quelled so easily? Unfortunately, he still had a taboo on him and couldn't bear to part with her. This was his first time experiencing the feeling of both love and hate for a woman. Cold eyes stared at her, and in the end. Chapter 571. In the end, Long Fei-yi pulled Han Yunshi over and hugged her tightly. This way he managed to quell the strongest desire he had ever felt in his life. Han Yunshi was terrified. She didn't dare to move and allowed him to hug and stick to her. Although she was frightened and nervous, she had to admit that she was a little happy and expectant. However, she wasn't crazy enough to forget that they were in a carriage. After a long while, when she felt that Long Fei-yi had calmed down, she carefully lifted her head to look at him. It was only then that she realized that Long Fei-yi had been staring at her for a long time. The incident at Heaven Mountain had long been thrown to the back of her mind. Seeing his cold gaze and his silence, she instinctively buried her head in his embrace. She thought that they should have finished walking the 100 steps, right? She couldn't even tell if she had walked more, or if he had walked more. Legend had it that there was a kind of path called the path of no return. Every time you took a step forward, the path behind you would disappear. There was no way to retreat and there was no way to turn back. Han Yunshi thought that the 100 steps between them must also be a path of no return. Once they finished walking, it would be over. If they didn't turn back, they wouldn't walk again. At least, to her, that must be the case. After a long silence, Han Yunshi murmured, "Long Fei-yi." Although his face was cold, he immediately answered her. "Have you heard of the saying of 100 steps?" Han Yunshi asked. "What's 100 steps?" Before meeting Han Yunshi, how could Long Fei-yi have heard of such a thing? Even if he had heard of it, he would have turned a deaf ear. There are actually only 100 steps between any man and woman in the world. As long as one person takes a step closer to the other person, it is the beginning of a relationship. Some people can finish walking the 100 steps very quickly. Some people can't finish walking the 100 steps in their lifetime. Some people will even retreat further and further, Han Yunshi said mildly. Long Fei-yi listened and didn't express his opinion. Han Yunshi frowned. "What do you think?" Long Fei-yi thought for a moment and said, "There should be another type." Han Yunshi didn't understand. She just wanted to ask him what he thought of this saying. Who knew that Long Fei-yi would answer, "Some people will walk past you and pass by you in the end?" Han Yunshi was slightly surprised. After Granny Zhao told her about the 100 steps theory, she pondered for a long time. She really didn't think that there was such a possibility. She had to admit that this was probably the saddest thing of all. She muttered to herself, "You'll only overreach if you work too hard, right?" Long Fei-yi was very smart, but in the face of such an unfamiliar topic, he did not know where to start thinking. Of course, he didn't like it either. As long as he took a fancy to it, not to mention 100 steps, even 1,000 steps would be completed. "What nonsense are you thinking?" he asked with a frown. Han Yunshi resentfully stopped talking, but for some reason she couldn't help but recall Long Fei's words again and again. "Some people will walk past you before brushing past you, won't they?" The more she thought, the sadder she felt. She shook her head to clear her mind. Very soon they arrived at Taoran restaurant. Han Yunshi saw Duanmu Bei as soon as she stepped out of the carriage. She was extremely disappointed. "Looks like we won't be able to get rid of this guy. Do you think you can depose the crown prince of a country with just a few words?" Long Fei-yi murmured. "You." Han Yunshi was stunned. Could it be that Long Fei-yi was provoking Duanmu Bei on purpose? Wasn't it to topple him? Emperor Kangcheng is smarter than Tianhui. Moreover, Duanmu Bei's mother's clan has great influence in Western Zhou. It'll take more than a day to shake him. Duanmu Yao even colluded with Jun Yixie, but Emperor Kangcheng only ordered her banished from the imperial palace. He didn't chase after her to Celestial Mountain. There's a reason for all of this. "I'll explain it to you later," Long Fei-yi murmured. Now Han Yunshi was even more certain that Long Fei-yi had provoked Duanmu Bei to help her vent her anger. Her heart warmed as she decided not to disappoint Long Fei-yi's efforts, nor her own forbearance. Duanmu Bei had to pay the price. After getting off the carriage, Long Fei-yi and Emperor Kangcheng only nodded as before. Long Fei-yi ignored Duanmu Bei, and Han Yunshi didn't even spare him a glance. She wanted to nod at Emperor Kangcheng as a form of greeting, but the emperor didn't even spare her a glance. He didn't even give her a chance. Han Yunshi nodded halfway but didn't feel awkward. She pretended nothing had happened. Duanmu Bei, on the other hand, saw it and his lips curled in disdain. Han Yunshi saw it too, but she didn't fuss over it. She held her head high and puffed out her chest as she walked alongside Long Fei-yi. Her greeting to Emperor Kangcheng wasn't out of humility, nor was it to curry favor with him. Emperor Kongcheng's reaction revealed his narrow-mindedness and narrow-mindedness. What was there to be embarrassed about? Emperor Kongcheng glanced at Han Yunshi out of the corner of his eye. Although he hated this woman for stealing his son-in-law, he couldn't help but admire her bearing and strength of character. If it had been any other woman today, even if she was from the imperial family, she wouldn't have been so calm and at ease. Naturally, Long Fei saw all of it with his own eyes. The entire tea house had been booked, so it was empty. A servant led the way. Emperor Kongcheng gestured to Long Fei Yi to go first. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything, but politely gestured for Emperor Kongcheng to go first. The two of them didn't argue and walked forward together. One was the emperor, the other the Duke of Qin. Although they were on equal footing, Long Fei Yi had the upper hand. Han Yunshi walked confidently beside Long Fei Yi, while Duanmu Bei followed respectfully behind Emperor Kongcheng. As the crown prince, he was undoubtedly the most humble of them all. Unfortunately, he still refused to come to his senses. From time to time, he would glare resentfully at Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi. They took their seats in the tea house in the middle of the lake. Like Northern Li, the people of Western Zhou preferred wine to tea. Taorenju was one of the rarest tea houses in Western Zhou. It was also one of the most expensive tea houses in Western Zhou. They served a type of tea called bramble tea, a precious specialty of Western Zhou. Once they were seated, tea was served. Emperor Kongcheng wasn't in a hurry to get down to business. Instead, he introduced bramble tea to Long Fei Yi. Duke of Qin, this tea grows on the brambles of the desert. Only 100 or so leaves can be plucked from a single patch of bramble land every year. As a result, only 2 jars of bramble tea are produced in the Tinga Desert each year. One is in Taorenju, and the other is in Zhen's possession. As Emperor Kongcheng spoke, he invited Long Fei Yi to sample the tea. Try it. You didn't get to try it when you came 7 or 8 years ago. You must try it today. Long Fei Yi nodded, but casually handed the tea to Han Yunshi. I wanted to bring you here to try this bramble tea 7 or 8 years ago. Unfortunately, you didn't come. Han Yunshi was stunned. What was Long Fei Yi talking about? 7 or 8 years ago, the distance between them wasn't just 100 steps. Could be considered several thousand years. Emperor Kongcheng and Duanmu Bei were also stunned. Father and son glanced at each other in shock. Could it be that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi had been together since 7 or 8 years ago? Was that why he'd always looked down on Yao Yao? Although it was a surprise, it made sense. Han Yunshi was betrothed to Long Fei Yi before she was even born. Naturally, she'd known Long Fei Yi before Yao Yao did. It turned out that this woman really was pretending to be a good-for-nothing at the Han estate. Han Yunshi quickly accepted the tea. After taking a few sips, she said, "Sweet? You hate it the most." Both Emperor Kongcheng and Duanmu Bei felt awkward. Long Fei Yi took the teacup and sniffed it. "Is this tea sweet?" he asked Emperor Kongcheng. "Yes," Emperor Kongcheng replied honestly. Long Fei Yi didn't say whether he liked it or not. He only nodded and set down the teacup. Emperor Kongcheng quickly recovered from his embarrassment and ordered someone to change it to Tianning's black tea. Duanmu Bei didn't even dare to look at his imperial father. How was he supposed to know that Long Fei Yi didn't like sweet things? Although there wasn't the smell of war, the husband and wife were singing the same tune to give Emperor Kongcheng a show of strength. After drinking a few cups of black tea, Duanmu Bei stood up with his teacup in hand. Although he was proud and spoiled, he still had self-awareness. He used the tea in place of wine to toast Long Fei Yi. "Your Highness Duke of Qin," this one was impetuous just now and made a slip of the tongue. "My intentions weren't sincere. I hope that a great man like you won't hold a grudge against a lowly person like me and forgive this one." It was enough for a proper crown prince to go this far. As he spoke, he downed his cup of tea in one gulp. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi was busy pouring tea for Han Yunshi. Just like at the Chamberlain of Dependencies, Duanmu Bei treated him like heir. Duanmu Bei raised 2 more cups of tea and downed them both in one gulp as an apology. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi ignored him. Duanmu Bei helplessly cast an innocent look at Emperor Kongcheng, who kept a straight face. It wasn't clear whether he was angry at Duanmu Bei or Long Fei Yi, but he didn't say a word. Duanmu Bei was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he went forward, would he have to kneel down and apologize to Long Fei Yi? How could that be possible? If he retreated, wouldn't this matter be ruined? Although his imperial father's gaze was frighteningly dark, he could only beg him for mercy. The pavilion was silent. Han Yunshi was calm and composed as she drank tea and admired the lake scenery. After Long Fei Yi poured her a few cups of tea, he poured one for Emperor Kongqing as well. Emperor Kongqing was also polite as he chatted with the Duke of Qin. It seemed like he'd given up on Duanmu Bei. In reality, Duanmu Bei was truly stupid. Both Emperor Kongqing and Han Yunshi knew that as long as Duanmu Bei apologized to Han Yunshi, the Duke of Qin would be appeased and this matter would be dropped. Unfortunately, Duanmu Bei couldn't accept this and couldn't swallow his anger. He could only stand there. The longer he stood there, the angrier Emperor Kongqing became. He originally knew that Duanmu Bei had been provoked by Long Fei Yi on purpose, so he didn't really plan on punishing him. Now that he saw how stupid Duanmu Bei was, Emperor Kongqing was determined to punish him. Drinking tea wasn't like eating or drinking. If there wasn't enough common topics to talk about, it wouldn't last long. Before long, Long Fei Yi was about to leave. Duanmu Bei panicked. "Your Highness Duke of Qin, this one was wrong. What will it take for you to forgive this one?" It would have been better if he hadn't said that. Now that he did, Emperor Kongqing almost smashed his teacup. What would Long Fei Yi do? Of course he would continue to ignore Duanmu Bei. Not only did he ignore Duanmu Bei, but he also gave Emperor Kongqing a meaningful look, as if to tell him that he didn't care about Duanmu Bei. Emperor Kongqing's original plan was for him to appear incognito and make the Duke of Qin stay, giving the Crown Prince an opportunity to apologize. But now it looked like he had no choice but to apologize in person. Otherwise, he really wouldn't be able to keep the Duke of Qin. He finally looked straight at Han Yunshi. Chapter 572. Finally, Emperor Kongqing looked straight at Han Yunshi. Just then, he'd given her the cold shoulder when she was about to greet him. Now he finally had a favor to ask of her. If she didn't put on airs, then she wouldn't be Han Yunshi. In the past, before she'd won Long Fei Yi's favor and had to rely on herself for everything, she'd already dared to challenge Emperor Tianhui, much less now. Despite knowing that Emperor Kongqing was staring at her, Han Yunshi pretended not to notice. She lowered her eyes to the tea in her cup without a word. Emperor Kongqing knew that if he wanted to keep the Duke of Qin, he'd have to appease this woman's anger first. If he'd known earlier that Duanmu Bei was so stupid, he wouldn't have neglected Han Yunshi just then. Now it was too late for regrets. Emperor Kongqing quickly withdrew his gaze and said, "The two of you," the Crown Prince spoke rudely. "It was my Western Zhou that was lacking in manners. I ask that you give Zhen some face and refrain from harboring resentment in your heart and ruining your mood for this visit." A single "my Western Zhou was lacking in manners" was a big deal. Although it wasn't an outright apology, it was still a rare sight for a ruler of a nation to say such words. Long Fei Yi finally spoke up. "Your lordship has never argued with impetuous children. Emperor Kongqing's words are too serious." He was giving Emperor Kongqing face, but also clearly scolding Duanmu Bei. But what could Duanmu Bei do? If Long Fei Yi could just let things go like this, Duanmu Bei thought, I'd accept being called an impetuous child. But even though Long Fei had forgiven him, Han Yunshi's face was still gloomy. She said unhappily, "I wanted to stay a few more days and take the chance to tour Western Zhou's desert scenery, but now I'm not in the mood." Finally, Duanmu Bei came to his senses. Despite his unwillingness, he quickly poured some tea for Han Yunshi. "Qin Wangfei, this one has always been outspoken. If I've offended you in any way, I ask for your forgiveness." The person in question had finally apologized. It was useless. Han Yunshi sneered in her heart. She carried out Long Fei Yi's policy of ignoring Duanmu Bei to the end. Emperor Kongqing knew he still had to get past Han Yunshi, so he took advantage of the situation to say, "Qin Wangfei, we've heard about what happened at the Honglu Temple. It was indeed the Crown Prince's fault. Why don't we have the Crown Prince accompany you and the Duke of Qin on a tour tomorrow as an apology?" Just now, Emperor Kongqing had used the words "you two" in his apology, which naturally included his apology to Han Yunshi. Now that he'd made such a concession, coupled with the Duke of Qin's concession, Han Yunshi should be content. However, Han Yunshi feigned ignorance and said angrily, "Emperor Kongqing, aren't you being too partial to your son? Accompanying us on a tour wasn't a punishment, it was clearly a reward. There's no one like you. What a bully. Yunshi, don't be rude." Long Fei Yi scolded immediately. Han Yunshi said angrily, "Your Highness, did I say anything wrong?" Emperor Kongqing was clearly biased. "Accompanying us on a tour counts as a punishment? If this gets out, what do you think? If Crown Prince Yi didn't bully us, would there be no one else in Western Zhou to accompany us on a tour?" Long Fei Yi was speechless but could only sigh softly. "In any case, Qinxie will leave today. Qinxie will never come to Western Zhou again. Han Yunxi crossed her arms in front of her chest and pursed her lips, looking completely unreasonable. That's right, she was being unreasonable on purpose. If this was a formal setting, Han Yunxi's words as Qin Wangfei would be considered unreasonable. But this was a private meeting, so Han Yunxi didn't lose her status as a woman. Of course Emperor Kangcheng could tell that Han Yunxi was doing it on purpose, but the Duke of Qin looked like he couldn't do anything about it. What else could he do? Someone come, pass on Zhen's orders. The Crown Prince is to be grounded for 3 months and forfeited a year's worth of salary. Without Zhen's permission, no one is to enter the Eastern Palace. Emperor Kangcheng had no choice but to bite the bullet. Imperial Father. Duanmu Bei panicked. Emperor Kangcheng glowered at him. Someone come take the Crown Prince back. Imperial Father, this son knows his wrongs. I know my wrongs. Imperial Father, please spare this son this once. Imperial Father. Imperial Father. Duanmu Bei was dragged to the door, but he was still shouting and begging for mercy. 3 months was too much for him. In the fight for the throne, he had always been ruthless and merciless when it came to eradicating dissidents. Now that he had been put under house arrest for 3 months, it was enough for those forces that had been trampled to death by him to rise again. Their counterattack was bound to be even more ruthless. How could he not be afraid? How could he not be afraid of losing the position of heir apparent in 3 months? This time Han Yunxi knew when to stop. Emperor Kangcheng is wise. A son like this who shames you should be punished severely as an example to others. Han Yunxi laughed. Emperor Kangcheng couldn't bring himself to laugh, nor could he stay any longer. After chatting for a bit, he said that he had urgent matters to attend to and had to leave. Before he left, he summoned General Chu to receive him. General Chu had just received news that the Crown Prince was under house arrest for 3 months and was in the middle of discussing how to salvage the situation. When he received Emperor Kangcheng's order, he almost dropped the teacup in his hand. He didn't expect to meet Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi so soon, nor did he expect to receive them. With Crown Prince Ye's example as well as the Nether clan secrets, General Chu couldn't help but feel nervous even though he'd seen much of the world and had weathered many storms. When he arrived, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were taking a boat tour around the lake. Long Fei Yi personally rowed the boat and didn't have any servants to attend to them. In other words, no one could eavesdrop on the couple's conversation. General Chu had naturally planted spies when he'd helped Duanmu Bei reserve the Taoran Inn. Unfortunately, he couldn't find anything now, so all he could do was sit by the lake and wait. He knew that Long Fei Ye's target wasn't Crown Prince Yi, but the Chu clan. But he couldn't figure out how Long Fei Yi was planning to deal with the Chu clan. Currently, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's boat was docked in the middle of the lake. Your Highness, Qinxie must be losing face for being so unreasonable, right? Han Yunxi teased. Long Fei Yi arched a brow at her and gave her a rare compliment. You're getting smarter and smarter. Isn't it all because I learned from you? Han Yunxi was rarely good at flattery. Long Fei Yi examined her from head to toe but didn't answer. Instead, he returned her smile. It was much harder to make this guy who cherished his words like gold smile than to make him speak. Han Yunxi had gotten used to his smiles at some point. Where's Tangli and Chu Shifeng? Han Yunxi asked. They went to Thousand Buddha Cave to scout the way, Long Fei Yi replied. Did they find anything? Han Yunxi asked hastily. Chu Shifeng's been scouting for days without any news. Tangli just went yesterday but I don't know if he can get in, Long Fei Yi said. To them, Thousand Buddha Cave was much more important than dealing with the Nether clan. The Chu clan knew where the Wood of 10,000 Poisons was, but they hadn't gotten their hands on it after all these years. Han Yunxi had a premonition that they'd be staying in Western Zhou's White City for a while. By sunset, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had reached the shore. General Chu immediately put on a smiling face and greeted them with all the proper etiquette. He didn't mention a word about the Nether clan or the Chu clan. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi pretended nothing had happened as they followed General Chu back to the Chamberlain of Dependencies. Before they left, General Chu said, Duke of Qin, tomorrow's meeting with His Majesty is scheduled for after morning court. I'll come to pick you up then. Long Fei Yi nodded without a word. General Chu clasped his hands and turned to leave, but he couldn't help but turn back after he'd left the Chamberlain of Dependencies. He'd discussed things with the Nether clan head before. If Long Fei Yi refused to talk to them, they'd have to find Long Fei Yi of their own accord. Otherwise, they'd be in a passive position forever. Now was the perfect time to clear things up. Otherwise, who knew what Long Fei Yi would talk to Emperor Kangcheng tomorrow? As if expecting General Chu to turn back, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi remained in their seats without moving. As soon as General Chu entered the room, he signaled for all the servants to withdraw. When he faced Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi alone, his expression was gloomy. However, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi didn't move, which made General Chu very uncomfortable. "Duke of Qin, you should know what the old man wants, right?" General Chu got straight to the point. Long Fei Yi replied with 3 words, "I don't know." "Then why did you let Wuchang come back?" General Chu asked. Long Fei Yi replied, "To this prince, 1 Chu Tianyin is enough." General Chu was furious. "What did you do to Tianyin?" Long Fei Yi didn't answer. Instead, he sneered, "Someone told this prince before that the Nether clan's secret art is called the driving arrow art. Arrows without a bow are incomparably powerful. This prince didn't believe it then, but I didn't expect to experience it so soon." General Chu grew alarmed at his words. He, the Nether clan head, and Wuchang had never been able to figure out how Long Fei Yi knew that the driving arrow art was the Nether clan's secret history. How could he be so sure that the Chu clan was the Nether clan's descendant? After all, the driving arrow art was a secret of the Nether clan. It wasn't something that just anyone could know about. Unless one was trustworthy and entrusted with important tasks, one wouldn't have the right to learn the art. Even Chu Qingge didn't know about the clan's secret, nor did she know how to use it. Long Fei Yi's words today meant that someone must have told him. But who could have told him? General Chu was absolutely certain that no one in the Nether clan would dare to reveal the secret. There was only one other person who could do it. That person was the only outsider in the world who knew about the Nether clan's secret, Gu Beiyue. When he recalled how Gu Beiyue had refused the Nether clan head's offer to save Chu Tianyin and induced Chu Qingge's labor, General Chu grew even more suspicious. He wasn't stupid enough to ask Long Fei Yi who had revealed the secret. Even if he did, Long Fei Yi wouldn't tell him. "Duke of Qin, since you've left the Nether clan some face, why don't we get straight to the point? We'll meet at Taoranin tonight and discuss everything with the Nether clan head. How about it?" General Chu lowered his voice. Han Yunxi had always assumed that Chu Tianyin's father was the Nether clan head. She never expected the Nether clan head to be someone else. "General Chu, it's getting late. Please go back," he refused coldly. His attitude made General Chu even more uneasy. He said, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, it was Tianyin's fault for what happened in the underground palace. This old man will apologize to the 2 of you. As the saying goes, no discord, no concord. Since your Highness is going for the perplexing butterfly illusion as well, why don't you join forces with the Nether clan? Trust me, the Nether clan won't disappoint your Highness. I hope your Highness will reconsider." Long Fei Yi refused without hesitation. "General Chu, I won't be seeing you out." General Chu had already made things so clear, but Long Fei Yi was still so adamant? General Chu was thoroughly stunned by the man's attitude. As soon as he left the Chamberlain of Dependencies, he went straight to find the Nether clan head. Once the Nether clan head understood the situation, he grew more and more confused as to what Long Fei Yi was planning. The more he tried to figure it out, the more curious, uneasy, and impulsive he became. One could say that Long Fei Yi's attitude had driven both a clan head and a clan head crazy. They didn't dare to sit around and wait for their deaths. That night, the 2 of them snuck into the Chamberlain of Dependencies to see Long Fei Yi. Would Long Fei Yi relent this time? Even Han Yunxi couldn't figure it out. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.